The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken promises. Naomi Washington stood perfectly still in her blue silk dress, her dark skin glowing under the fluorescent lights. Her hands were clasped in front of her, not from nervousness but from restraint. Across the aisle, her husband Richard Sterling sat with his legs spread wide, taking up space like he always did, like the world owed him room to breathe. "Your Honor, my client has been exceptionally generous," Richard's attorney said, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Sterling is offering Mrs. Sterling a lump sum of $200,000 and the Toyota in the garage. Given the ironclad prenuptial agreement, this is more than fair." Naomi heard someone snicker behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Brittany Cole, the executive assistant turned mistress, sitting in the gallery with her legs crossed and her smile sharp. Next to Brittany sat Constance Sterling, Richard's mother, wearing pearls and judgment in equal measure. "$200,000, Richard repeated, his voice carrying across the courtroom like he was announcing a generous donation at a charity gala. He turned slightly, making sure Brittany could see his profile. "That's more than she came into this marriage with." Brittany giggled. Actually giggled. The sound made Naomi's jaw tighten. Judge Lawrence, a man in his 60s with gray hair and tired eyes, looked down at the papers before him. He'd been quiet through most of the proceedings, occasionally making notes, sometimes looking at Naomi with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, his voice cutting through Richard's smugness. "I understand you've submitted a letter to the court. Is that correct?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," Richard's attorney interjected. "We haven't been provided with copies of this letter. This violates discovery protocols. The letter was submitted under seal, as is my right when presenting evidence of fraud and criminal activity to the court," Patricia Monroe said, standing up beside Naomi. Patricia was 53, with silver streaks in her black hair and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases that seemed impossible. "Everything has been done according to proper legal procedure." Judge Lawrence held up a hand. "I'll determine what's proper in my courtroom, Ms. Monroe." But his tone wasn't harsh. He picked up the sealed envelope from his desk, the one Naomi had delivered through Patricia 3 days ago. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he opened it. Richard leaned back in his chair, whispering something to his attorney. Whatever he said made the lawyer smile. Behind them, Constance adjusted her pearls and whispered to Brittany, who nodded enthusiastically. The judge pulled out several pages from the envelope. His eyes moved across the first page quickly, then slower. His eyebrows rose. He flipped to the second page, then the third. Then he did something Naomi hadn't expected. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a brief smile. A real laugh, the kind that came from deep in the chest. He pressed his hand against his mouth, trying to compose himself, but his shoulders shook. The courtroom went silent except for that sound. "Your Honor?" Richard's attorney stood up, his confidence wavering. "Is something amusing?" Judge Lawrence cleared his throat, but a smile remained on his face. He looked directly at Richard, and the smile changed into something else. Something harder. "Oh, this is good," the judge said quietly, but everyone heard it. The acoustics in the courtroom carried every word. "This is very good." Richard's face changed. The smugness drained away, replaced by confusion, then something that looked like fear. He leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorney. Brittany stopped smiling. Her hand reached for Richard's shoulder, but he shrugged it off, focused entirely on the judge. "Your Honor, I must insist on knowing what's in that letter," Richard's attorney said, his voice rising slightly. "My client has rights." "Your client," Judge Lawrence said, setting the papers down and looking at Richard with an expression that made grown men uncomfortable, "has been very busy. And very, very stupid." Constance gasped. Brittany's mouth fell open. Richard's face turned red, then pale. "Your Honor, I object to this characterization," Richard's attorney said, but his voice lacked conviction now. Naomi watched it all unfold, her face calm. She'd spent 3 months preparing for this moment. 3 months of sleepless nights, careful documentation, and quiet rage that she'd channeled into action instead of tears. Patricia squeezed her arm gently, a small gesture of support. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, turning his attention to Naomi. "You've presented evidence here of quite a few interesting things. Hidden bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Asset transfers to shell corporations. Fraudulent business dealings." He paused, looking back at Richard. "And some particularly fascinating information about the prenuptial agreement your husband was so confident would protect him." "That prenup is valid," Richard said, standing up. His attorney grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back down, but Richard shook him off. It was signed by both parties. It's legal. It was, Judge Lawrence agreed. Until you violated the morality clause. And the spousal contribution clause. And about 6 other clauses that your wife has documented with remarkable thoroughness. He picked up one of the pages again. Did you really think transferring assets to your girlfriend's name would protect them? Brittany's face went white. She looked at Richard, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Your Honor, we need time to review this evidence, Richard's attorney said, gathering papers frantically. We need to prepare a response. You've had 8 years to not commit fraud, Judge Lawrence said. I think that's enough time. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Naomi heard someone behind her say something about karma. She didn't smile, didn't react. She just stood there waiting. This letter also contains sworn testimony from several witnesses, the judge continued, flipping through pages. Including Mr. Trevor Banks, your former business partner, who has some interesting things to say about the company's founding. Apparently, Mrs. Sterling's family money funded the initial startup. That makes her not just a spouse but a business partner. Which means that prenup you're hiding behind. It doesn't apply to her business ownership stake. Richard sat down hard like his legs had given out. His attorney was reading through his own papers, looking increasingly panicked. Furthermore, Judge Lawrence said, and now his voice had lost all traces of amusement, there's evidence here of deliberate asset hiding, tax fraud, and witness intimidation. Mrs. Sterling has documentation of threatening phone calls, attempts to access her personal accounts, and efforts to destroy evidence. That's a lie, Richard said, his voice hoarse. She's lying. She has recordings, the judge said flatly. Time-stamped, verified recordings. She has bank records. She has email correspondence. She has testimony from your own employees, Mr. Sterling, people you thought were loyal to you. He looked at the papers again, shaking his head. You got sloppy. Or maybe you just never thought your wife was paying attention. Naomi had been paying attention. To everything. Every late-night phone call Richard took in the garage. Every receipt she found in his suit pockets. Every time he mentioned taking Brittany to business dinners and conferences. Every time Constance made a snide comment about Naomi not contributing to the family wealth. She'd been paying attention when Richard started transferring money out of their joint accounts. When he put the beach house in Brittany's name. When he convinced Naomi to sign documents he said were tax forms but were actually releases of claims to property. Patricia had helped her understand that last part. Those documents weren't legal because Naomi hadn't had independent counsel review them, and Richard had lied about their purpose. Fraud invalidated contracts. That was something Richard's expensive attorney should have told him. Your Honor, we request a continuance, Richard's attorney said, standing up. This is a lot of information to process. Denied, Judge Lawrence said. Your client had months to prepare his case. He chose to spend that time hiding assets and intimidating his wife. Now he can face the consequences. He looked at Naomi directly. Mrs. Sterling, I'm granting your request for a full forensic audit of all marital assets, including those transferred or hidden during the marriage. I'm also freezing all accounts pending this audit. Richard shot to his feet. You can't do that. I have a business to run. I have obligations. You should have thought about that before committing fraud, the judge said. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. For a moment, Naomi thought Richard might actually argue. His face was purple with rage, his hands clenched into fists. But his attorney pulled him down, whispering urgently in his ear. Constance stood up in the gallery. This is outrageous. My son built that company from nothing. This woman contributed nothing to his success. Mrs. Sterling Sr., Judge Lawrence said, his voice cold, sit down and be quiet or I'll have you removed from my courtroom. According to the evidence before me, your son built his company with your daughter-in-law's money and her family's connections. She contributed plenty. He just chose to forget that. Constance sat down, her face red. Brittany was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. She grabbed Richard's shoulder again, and this time he let her, though he looked like he wanted to shake her off. This hearing is adjourned, Judge Lawrence said, banging his gavel. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a full accounting of assets. Mrs. Sterling, your attorney will coordinate with the forensic accountants. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you cooperate fully. Any attempts to hide or transfer additional assets will result in criminal charges. He looked at Richard one more time and that almost smile returned. You'll never touch my money again, is that what you said? Well, Mr. Sterling, you might want to reconsider whose money it actually is. The gavel came down again, final and absolute. Naomi stood there as people filed out of the courtroom. She heard Brittany sobbing, heard Constance hissing at Richard, heard Richard's attorney on his phone already, probably calling in reinforcements. She heard all of it, but none of it mattered. Patricia touched her elbow. "Let's go. We have a lot of work to do." Naomi nodded. As they walked toward the exit, she passed Richard's row. He looked up at her, his face a mixture of rage and something else. Disbelief, maybe. Like he couldn't understand how this had happened, how his quiet wife had become this person who could dismantle his world with a single letter. She didn't say anything to him. There was nothing left to say. The time for talking had ended the day she found hotel receipts in his jacket pocket. The day she heard him tell Brittany on the phone that Naomi was just an obstacle to work around. The day Constance told her at a charity luncheon that she'd never been good enough for this family anyway. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright. Naomi took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling lighter than she had in months. Patricia was already on her phone, coordinating with the forensic team. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked when she hung up. Naomi considered the question. She thought about the 8 years she'd spent trying to be the perfect wife. The dinner parties she'd hosted for Richard's business partners. The charity events she'd organized to boost his company's image. The quiet support she'd provided while he took all the credit. The nights she'd lain awake listening to him come home late, smelling like someone else's perfume, knowing and saying nothing while she gathered evidence. "I feel," Naomi said slowly, "like I can finally breathe." Patricia smiled. "Good. Because now the real work begins. We're going to take everything he thought he could keep from you. Every hidden account, every transferred asset, every dollar he tried to steal. And we're going to do it completely legally." Naomi looked back at the courthouse, where she knew Richard was probably still inside, arguing with his attorneys, calling his mother, maybe comforting Brittany. Let them scramble. Let them panic. Let them feel, for once, what it was like to be powerless. She'd been powerless for too long. The woman who had walked into that courtroom today wasn't the same woman who had married Richard Sterling 8 years ago. That woman had believed in love and trust and partnership. This woman believed in documentation, evidence, and justice. "Let's go," Naomi said to Patricia. "We have a company to audit." As they walked to Patricia's car, Naomi pulled out her phone. There was a text from Trevor, Richard's former business partner, the one who had provided testimony about the company's founding. It said simply, "Did it work?" Naomi typed back, "Better than we hoped." She hit send and put the phone away. The judge's laughter still echoed in her mind. That moment when everything changed, when Richard's confidence cracked, when Brittany's smile vanished, when Constance's superiority crumbled. That was the moment Naomi had been working toward. Not for revenge exactly, though she wouldn't lie and say that didn't feel good. But for something more important, justice. For being seen. For having her contributions recognized. For making sure that Richard Sterling understood, finally, that she was not nothing. She was everything he tried to pretend she wasn't. And now the whole world was going to know it. 8 years earlier, Naomi Washington had believed in fairy tales. Not the princess kind with castles and glass slippers, but the modern version where smart, ambitious people found each other and built something beautiful together. She'd met Richard Sterling at a tech conference in San Francisco. Naomi was there representing her family's investment firm, looking for promising startups to fund. Richard was there with a prototype and a dream, pitching his idea for a cloud security platform to anyone who would listen. He wasn't the most polished presenter. His slides had typos and his suit didn't fit quite right. But his passion was real, and Naomi could see past the rough edges to the potential underneath. She approached him after his pitch, introducing herself and asking questions about his technology. They talked for 3 hours that first day. About his vision for the company, about market opportunities, about the future of digital security. Naomi found herself drawn not just to his ideas but to him. The way his eyes lit up when he explained complex technical concepts. The way he listened when she offered business advice. The way he looked at her like she mattered. By the end of the conference, they'd exchanged numbers. By the end of the month, they were dating. By the end of the year, Naomi's family firm had invested $2 million in Richard's startup, and Naomi had moved from Boston to San Francisco to be with him. "You're taking a big risk," her father had said when she told him about the investment. Charles Washington was a careful man who had built his firm through conservative choices and thorough vetting. The company and the man. "I believe in both," Naomi had replied. And she had. Completely. The early days were hard but good. Richard worked 18-hour days and Naomi worked alongside him. She wasn't just his girlfriend but his business partner, helping refine his pitch, connecting him with potential clients, reviewing contracts. Her business degree and her father's training made her invaluable, though Richard always introduced her as his girlfriend first, business partner second. She didn't mind then. She was in love, and love meant supporting your partner's dreams. They got married 2 years after they met, a small ceremony in Napa Valley. Richard's mother Constance flew in from Connecticut, wearing a tight smile and making pointed comments about how quickly they were moving. But Richard ignored her concerns and Naomi tried to do the same. "She just needs time to get to know you," Richard had said the night before the wedding, after Constance had made another comment about hoping they'd signed a prenup. "She's protective. She raised me alone after my father died. I'm all she has." The prenup existed. Richard's attorney had drawn it up, presenting it to Naomi 3 days before the wedding. She'd felt a twist in her stomach when he handed her the papers, but Richard had held her hand and explained it was just a formality, something his attorney insisted on. "It protects both of us," he'd said, "just in case anything happens. But nothing will happen. We're building something together." Naomi had signed it without having her own attorney review it. That was her first mistake. She trusted Richard completely, believed in their partnership, believed that the prenup was indeed just a formality. The document stated that any assets brought into the marriage would remain separate, and any assets acquired during the marriage would be divided equally unless otherwise specified. What Naomi didn't realize was that, otherwise specified, gave Richard enormous flexibility. And what she definitely didn't know was that the document included a morality clause that would void the entire prenup if either party committed adultery or engaged in fraudulent business practices. Richard's attorney probably thought that clause protected Richard. It turned out to protect Naomi instead. The first 3 years of marriage were the happiest of Naomi's life. Sterling Security Solutions grew from a startup to a mid-sized company. They moved from Richard's cramped apartment to a house in Pacific Heights. Naomi continued working behind the scenes, though Richard gradually stopped mentioning her contributions in interviews and presentations. "It confuses people," he'd explain when she asked why he'd stopped crediting her in a major tech magazine profile. "They want the story of the lone genius founder. If I start talking about investors and partners, it dilutes the narrative." "But I'm not just an investor," Naomi had said. "I helped build this." "I know that and you know that," Richard had replied, kissing her forehead. "That's what matters." She'd accepted that explanation. She'd accepted a lot of explanations in those early years. When Richard started traveling more for business, when he hired Brittany Cole as his executive assistant despite Naomi's suggestion that they needed someone more experienced, when he began coming home later and later with excuses about client dinners and strategy sessions. The company went public in year 5 of their marriage. Richard became a billionaire overnight. Naomi was a multimillionaire on paper, though most of her wealth was tied up in company stock. They bought a bigger house, a beach property in Malibu, and a penthouse in New York. Richard started wearing custom suits and buying expensive watches. He hired a personal assistant, a driver, and a social media manager. Constance moved from Connecticut to San Francisco, buying a house 3 blocks away. She inserted herself into their lives with increasing frequency, hosting dinners where she invited people she thought Richard should know, people who could help his career. Naomi was always included but increasingly sidelined. Constance would seat her at the opposite end of the table from Richard, would interrupt her when she spoke, would redirect conversations away from her contributions to the company. "She's just being difficult," Richard would say when Naomi complained. "You know how mothers are. Just ignore her." But it was hard to ignore someone who was constantly there, constantly making small cuts disguised as concern. "Naomi dear, are you putting on weight?" Constance would ask at dinner parties. Richard's position requires a certain image. Or, "Naomi, perhaps you should let the professionals handle the business discussions. You don't want to embarrass Richard with incorrect information." The worst part was that Richard never defended her. He would change the subject or excuse them from the room, but he never told his mother to stop, never made it clear that Naomi deserved respect. His silence hurt more than Constance's words. Brittany Cole started working as Richard's executive assistant in year 6. She was 26, blonde, efficient, and ambitious. Naomi had interviewed 3 other candidates who were more qualified, but Richard had overruled her choice, hiring Brittany instead. "She's got something the others don't," he'd said. "That hunger. That drive." What she had, Naomi would later discover, was a willingness to be more than an assistant. But in the beginning, Naomi had tried to be welcoming. She'd invited Brittany to lunch, offered to help her navigate the company culture, treated her like a colleague. Brittany had smiled and thanked her while slowly pushing her out of meetings and decisions. Richard prefers to handle this internally, Brittany would say when Naomi tried to attend strategy sessions. He asked me to take notes and brief him privately. Richard's schedule is completely full this week, Brittany would say when Naomi suggested they have dinner together. He's working late every night on the merger. The merger was Richard's next big move, acquiring a smaller competitor to expand Sterling Security Solutions' market share. Naomi had helped analyze the deal, had reviewed the financials, had identified potential risks. But when the merger was announced, Richard stood at the podium alone, taking credit for the strategic vision while Brittany stood beside him, handing him papers and smiling for the cameras. Naomi watched from the audience, feeling something shift inside her. It was a small shift, barely noticeable, like the first crack in a foundation. She told herself she was being paranoid, that marriage required compromise, that Richard's success was her success too. But the cracks kept forming. Small things noticed and dismissed. The way Brittany would laugh at Richard's jokes, her hand touching his arm. The way Richard would text during dinner, saying it was work but tilting his phone away so Naomi couldn't see the screen. The way he'd started working late 4, then 5, then 6 nights a week. "I'm building an empire," he'd say when she complained about his absence. "This is what it takes. You used to understand that." "I still understand that," Naomi would reply. "I just miss my husband. I'm right here." But he wasn't. Not really. The man she'd married, the one who had valued her opinions and respected her contributions, was disappearing behind the billionaire he'd become. Or maybe that man had never existed. Maybe Naomi had simply been useful during the building phase, and now that the building was done, she was just an obstacle to Richard's next chapter. The affair started sometime in year 7, though Naomi didn't confirm it until year 8. Looking back, the signs were obvious. The hotel receipts she found in his jacket pocket. The perfume smell that wasn't hers. The way he'd stopped touching her, stopped looking at her with any real interest. She confronted him once, early on, before she had proof. "Are you having an affair?" He'd looked shocked, then angry. "How can you even ask me that? After everything we've built together? I'm out there working my tail off for us and you're accusing me of cheating?" Naomi had apologized. She'd actually apologized for questioning him. He'd accepted her apology with the air of someone forgiving a foolish child, then left for another business trip with Brittany. That was when Naomi stopped apologizing and started investigating. She hired a private investigator first, a woman named Carol who specialized in infidelity cases. Carol came back with photos within 2 weeks. Richard and Brittany having dinner at expensive restaurants. Richard and Brittany entering hotels together. Richard and Brittany walking on the beach in Malibu, at the house that was supposed to be Naomi and Richard's private retreat. Naomi looked at the photos and felt strangely calm. No tears, no rage. Just a cold clarity that settled over her like snow. She paid Carol, thanked her for her work, and went home to the empty house. Richard was on another business trip, Brittany with him obviously, and Naomi sat in the living room they'd decorated together, looking at the life they'd built. Everything in this house was purchased with money from the company. The company that Naomi's family money had started. The company that Naomi had helped build. The company that Richard now acted like was his alone. She could leave. Take what the prenup allowed, which wasn't much, and start over. That's what most people would do. That's what Richard probably expected her to do. Or she could fight. She could do what her father had taught her, what she'd learned in business school, what she'd practiced in her family's firm. She could be strategic. She could be smart. She could be patient. Naomi pulled out her laptop and started making lists. Assets. Accounts. Properties. Investments. Everything she knew about Sterling Security Solutions finances. Everything she'd helped create and everything Richard had tried to hide from her. Then she called Trevor Banks. Trevor had been Richard's first business partner, the technical genius behind the initial security platform. Richard had pushed him out in year 3, offering him a cash settlement instead of the equity he deserved. Trevor had taken the money, signed the non-disclosure agreement, and disappeared from the tech world. "I need your help," Naomi said when Trevor answered. "And I think you might want to help me." "With what?" Trevor's voice was cautious. He'd learned to be careful around anyone connected to Richard Sterling. "Taking back what he stole from both of us." There was a long pause. Then Trevor said, "Tell me more." That phone call was the beginning of Naomi's real work. Not the work of being Richard Sterling's wife, but the work of becoming the woman who would take him down. The night Naomi found the offshore account statements, rain was hammering against the windows of their Pacific Heights home. Richard was in Tokyo, supposedly meeting with potential Japanese clients. Brittany was with him, of course. Her calendar, which Richard no longer bothered to hide, showed they'd be gone for 8 more days. 8 days. Plenty of time to search. Naomi had become an expert at searching. She knew which files Richard kept locked in his office, which drawers had false bottoms, where he hid papers he thought were private. She'd learned to move through their home like a ghost, leaving no trace of her presence. Tonight's target was Richard's office safe. She'd watched him open it 100 times, had memorized the combination through patient observation. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the Golden Gate Bridge, expensive and tasteful like everything Richard bought now. The combination clicked smoothly. December 28, 85, Richard's birthday. He wasn't creative with passwords. She opened the safe and pulled out the contents carefully, photographing each item with her phone before examining it. Bank statements from institutions she didn't recognize. Account numbers that weren't in any of their financial documents. She photographed everything, her hands steady despite the implications of what she was finding. There was a statement from Sterling Solutions LLC, a company she'd never heard of. The account showed deposits of $750,000, $1.2 million, $890,000. Money that should have been in their joint accounts or in Sterling Security Solutions corporate accounts. Money that was disappearing into this shell company instead. More statements showed transfers to accounts in Brittany's name. Not small amounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Richard was setting up his mistress with a financial foundation, using marital assets to do it. Naomi photographed it all. Every page, every statement, every incriminating piece of paper. Then she put everything back exactly as she'd found it, closed the safe and rehung the painting. No one would know she'd been there. In her own office down the hall, the office Richard never entered anymore because he'd decided it was just her hobby space, Naomi uploaded the photos to an encrypted cloud drive. She had folders now, organized by category: financial documents, communications, photos from Carol, timeline of events. Each folder was building a case piece by piece. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Monroe, the attorney she'd hired 3 months ago. Patricia specialized in high-net-worth divorces, the kind where assets were hidden and fights were brutal. She'd been recommended by Trevor, who knew about these things from his own legal battle with Richard. Patricia's text said, "Got the subpoena approved. We can access company records tomorrow. How are you holding up?" Naomi typed back, "Fine. Just found offshore accounts. Sending files now. Good work. Get some rest." Rest. Naomi almost laughed. She hadn't slept properly in months. Every night was filled with questions and plans, with imagining the courtroom confrontation, with wondering if she was doing the right thing. Not the legally right thing. She was confident about that. But the emotionally right thing. The thing that would let her move forward. Because this wasn't just about money. The money was important, yes. She deserved half of what they'd built together, deserved recognition of her contributions. But more than that, this was about being seen. About refusing to be erased from a story she'd helped write. Richard had tried to erase her. Every interview where he claimed to be a self-made billionaire. Every article that portrayed him as a solo genius. Every time he stood in front of investors and employees, taking credit for strategies Naomi had developed, for connections Naomi had made, for work Naomi had done. She'd been erased so thoroughly that even she had started to disappear. Stopped offering opinions at dinner parties because Richard would talk over her. Stopped attending company events because Brittany would sideline her. Stopped arguing with Constance because Richard never backed her up anyway. The discovery of the offshore accounts was the final piece falling into place. Richard wasn't just unfaithful. He was stealing. From her, from the company, from investors. He'd been moving money for months, maybe years, preparing for the day he would divorce her and keep everything. He thought the prenup protected him. He thought Naomi was too passive to fight. He thought wrong on both counts. Naomi opened her laptop and added the new information to her master document, the timeline she'd been building. It started 18 months ago with the first hotel receipt she'd found. It tracked every piece of evidence chronologically, every suspicious transaction, every lie she'd caught him in. Patricia said it was the most thorough documentation she'd ever seen from a client. "Most people are too emotional to be this organized," Patricia had told her. "They want to yell and cry and throw things. You're treating this like a business deal." "It is a business deal," Naomi had replied. "He treated our marriage like a business deal. So I'm going to beat him at business." Her phone rang. Trevor's name appeared on the screen. She answered immediately. Did you get what you needed? Trevor asked without preamble. He'd become her ally in this, motivated by his own desire to see Richard face consequences. Richard had stolen Trevor's work, his ideas, his contributions to the company. Now Trevor was helping Naomi prove it. More than I expected, Naomi said. Offshore accounts, shell companies, transfers to Brittany. He's been planning this for a while. That sounds like Richard. Always 3 steps ahead, or so he thinks. Trevor paused. Are you sure you want to do this? Once you file, there's no going back. He's going to come at you with everything he has. I know. He'll try to destroy your reputation. He'll claim you're bitter, vengeful, crazy. He'll get his mother involved. He'll use Brittany to play the victim. It's going to get ugly. It's already ugly, Naomi said. I'm just making sure everyone sees it. Trevor laughed, a bitter sound. I wish I'd had half your courage when I went up against him. I took the settlement and ran. Biggest regret of my life. You're helping now. That's what matters. Yeah, well, I hope I can give them enough. You need to understand, Richard's good at covering his tracks. He's got lawyers who know every loophole. The offshore accounts are good, but he'll claim they're legitimate business structures. They're not legitimate. And I have documentation showing he used marital assets to fund them. Patricia says that's fraud. Patricia's right. But Richard will argue, and he'll have expensive experts backing him up. Naomi looked at the rain streaming down her window, thought about Richard in Tokyo, probably with Brittany in some expensive hotel suite, celebrating another successful trip, never knowing what was waiting for him at home. Let him argue, Naomi said. Let him bring his experts and his lawyers and his mother. I have the truth, Trevor. And I have time. He thinks I'm sitting at home being the obedient wife. He has no idea I've been preparing for this since the day I found the first receipt. They talked for another hour, reviewing the evidence, planning next steps. Trevor had agreed to testify about Richard's original lies regarding the company's founding, about how Naomi's money had actually funded the startup despite Richard's claims of bootstrapping his way to success. Trevor had copies of early contracts, emails that showed Naomi's involvement, documents Richard thought had been destroyed. When Naomi finally hung up, it was past midnight. The rain had stopped, and the city lights sparkled beyond her window. She thought about Richard, probably asleep now on the other side of the world, comfortable in his deception. She thought about Brittany, probably beside him, believing she'd won something. They had no idea what was coming. They thought Naomi was weak, passive, defeated. They thought she'd sign whatever divorce papers Richard presented, take whatever scraps he offered, and disappear quietly. That was their mistake. Naomi Washington had never been weak. She'd been patient. She'd been strategic. She'd been gathering evidence while they got careless and confident. The next morning, Naomi met Patricia at a coffee shop downtown, far from anywhere Richard's friends or colleagues might see them. Patricia arrived with Helen Rodriguez, the forensic accountant she'd brought onto the case. Helen was 40, sharp-eyed, and had made a career out of finding hidden money. She'd testified in dozens of high-profile divorce cases, and her reputation for thoroughness was legendary. Show me what you found, Helen said, pulling out her laptop. Naomi transferred the photos of the offshore account statements to Helen's encrypted drive. Helen's eyes widened as she scrolled through them. Oh, this is good, Helen said. This is really good. These accounts are in his name only, but the funding sources trace back to Sterling Security Solutions. That makes them marital assets, no matter what structure he tried to hide them under. Can you prove that? Naomi asked. Give me 3 weeks and full access to company records and I can prove anything. Helen grinned. Your husband made the classic mistake. He's smart enough to hide money but not smart enough to completely obscure the paper trail. There's always a trail. Always. Patricia leaned forward. Helen's going to need the subpoena we discussed. Once we serve Sterling Security Solutions with the document request, Richard will know something's coming. Are you ready for that? Naomi thought about it. Once the subpoena was served, Richard would be notified. He'd call her, demanding explanations. He'd panic, possibly, or get angry. The carefully maintained fiction of their marriage would crack open completely. I'm ready, Naomi said. Serve it. Patricia nodded and made a note on her legal pad. All right. We'll serve it when Richard gets back from Tokyo. That gives us time to prepare for his reaction. In the meantime, keep gathering evidence. Anything you can find about assets, about the affair, about business dealings. It all helps. What about the prenup? Naomi asked. You said there were clauses. Patricia smiled. Oh yes, the morality clause. If either party commits adultery, the prenup becomes void. All assets become subject to community property division, which means half of everything. But I have to prove the adultery. You have photos. You have hotel records. You have credit card statements showing Richard paid for Brittany's expenses. That's plenty of proof. Patricia paused. But there's something even better. The spousal contribution clause. This is less common, but it's in your prenup. It states that if one spouse makes substantial contributions to the other spouse's business success, those contributions must be recognized in any asset division. I made contributions, Naomi said quietly. I funded the startup. I helped build the business. I made the connections that got him his first major clients. I know. And we can prove it. Trevor's testimony, combined with early company documents showing your family's investment, plus emails and communications showing your involvement, it's an ironclad case that you weren't just a wife. You were a business partner. Naomi felt something loosen in her chest. Recognition. Finally. After 8 years of being sidelined and dismissed, someone was seeing her contributions and valuing them. What's Richard's best defense? She asked. She needed to know. Needed to be prepared for how he'd fight back. Helen answered. He'll claim the investment was a gift, not a loan or equity stake. He'll say your family gave the money freely with no expectation of return. He'll minimize your business contributions, claim you were just helping out as a spouse, not acting as a formal partner. But he can't prove that. No. And we can prove the opposite. Patricia's already digging up incorporation documents, shareholder agreements, everything that shows your family's money was an investment, not a gift. And Trevor's testimony about your actual role in the company will contradict Richard's lone genius narrative. They talked for 2 more hours, planning strategy, discussing timelines, preparing for various scenarios. When Naomi finally left the coffee shop, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, solid hope that this might actually work. She drove home through the city, past the Sterling Security Solutions headquarters building downtown, the glass tower with Richard's name on it. Soon, very soon, that building would represent something different. Not Richard's triumph, but the empire they'd built together. The empire he tried to steal. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Tokyo meeting's going well. Be home Friday. Miss you. The casual lie of it. The ease with which he pretended everything was fine. Naomi stared at the text for a long moment, then typed back, see you then. She didn't say she missed him too. That would have been a lie, and Naomi was done with lies. She'd been living in Richard's lie for too long, accepting his version of their story. Now she was going to tell the truth, and the truth was going to cost him everything he'd tried to take from her. Friday came. Richard returned from Tokyo, tan and relaxed, bringing Naomi an expensive scarf she didn't want. Brittany came back too, of course, returning to her executive assistant duties like nothing was wrong. Monday morning, Patricia's process server walked into Sterling Security Solutions headquarters and delivered the subpoena requesting all financial records, all communications regarding asset transfers, and all documents related to the company's founding and early investments. Naomi was at home when Richard called, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. What the hell is this? Why are lawyers serving subpoenas at my company? Our company, Naomi corrected calmly. And they're serving subpoenas because I've filed for divorce, Richard. The papers should reach you today. Silence. Then, you're filing for divorce? Yes. What? We can work through whatever problems you think we have. Naomi laughed, surprising herself. Problems I think we have? Richard, you've been having an affair with your assistant for over a year. You've been transferring marital assets to offshore accounts. You've been setting up your girlfriend with money that belongs to both of us. Those aren't problems I think we have. Those are crimes you've committed. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. I have bank statements, Richard. I have hotel records. I have testimony from people you've betrayed. I have everything I need. Another silence, longer this time. When Richard spoke again, his voice was different. Colt, you're going to regret this, Naomi. That prenup protects me. You'll get nothing. The prenup has a morality clause. You voided it when you cheated. But thanks for reminding me about it. My lawyer will make sure the judge knows you tried to use it despite breaking its terms. This is ridiculous. I'll fight this. I know you will. That's what the subpoena is for. We're going to audit everything, Richard. Every account, every transfer, every dollar. And when we're done, everyone will know exactly what kind of man you really are. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking slightly but her resolve solid. It had begun. The real fight. The one that would determine whether Richard got away with erasing her, or whether Naomi would reclaim her story. 3 weeks later, Helen called with preliminary findings from the forensic audit. "You need to sit down for this," Helen said. Naomi sat in her home office looking out at the city. "Tell me." "Richard's been hiding assets for 3 years. Shell companies in Delaware, offshore accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland, property in Brittany's name that was purchased with company funds. I estimate he's moved about $40 million out of accessible marital assets." $40 million. That's conservative. It could be more once I finish the deep dive. But here's the thing, Naomi. He did it sloppily. He was so confident you'd never look, so confident that prenup would protect him, that he didn't cover his tracks properly. Every transfer can be traced back to Sterling Security Solutions accounts. Every property purchase has a paper trail. He might as well have left us a map. So we can recover it. We can void the prenup based on fraud, and we can probably get the judge to award you additional penalties for his attempt to hide assets. Patricia thinks you're looking at 60% of marital assets, maybe more. 60%. Of a fortune valued at over $300 million. More money than Naomi had ever imagined needing or wanting. But it wasn't about the money, not really. It was about justice. Recognition. Refusal to be erased. "When can we present this to the court?" Naomi asked. "Patricia wants to wait until we have everything. Build the case so thoroughly that Richard has no defense. Another month, maybe 2. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you keep living your life. Let Richard think he's winning. Let him get confident. Confident people make mistakes." Naomi agreed and hung up. She looked around her office at the space Richard had dismissed as a hobby room. This was where she'd built the case that would bring him down. This was where she'd reclaimed her power. Her phone rang again. Richard's mother, Constance. Naomi considered not answering, then decided she might as well hear what the woman had to say. "Naomi," Constance's voice was ice. "This divorce nonsense needs to stop. You're embarrassing my son, embarrassing our family. Whatever problems you two have, you work them out privately. The problems we have are called adultery and fraud, Constance. I'm not working those out. I'm taking them to court. You ungrateful girl. Richard made you. Everything you have is because of him. And this is how you repay his generosity. Richard made himself with my family's money and my work. I'm just making sure everyone remembers that. You'll never win this. Richard has the best lawyers. The best accountants. You're nothing without him." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Naomi said calmly. "If I'm nothing, I'll lose and your son keeps everything. But if I'm right, if I did contribute, if I do deserve half, well, then you've been backing the wrong person this whole time." She hung up on Constance mid-sputter. Felt good. Better than good. It felt like freedom. The war room, as Patricia called it, was a conference room in her law firm's office. The walls were covered with timeline charts, financial flowcharts, and evidence summaries. A long table held boxes of documents, all carefully organized and labeled. This was where Naomi spent her days now, working alongside Patricia and Helen to build the case that would end her marriage and reclaim her life. "Walk me through the company's founding one more time," Patricia said, recording the conversation on her laptop. "We need your testimony to be airtight. Richard's attorneys will try to poke holes in everything you say." Naomi sat across from her, wearing a green sweater and jeans. She'd stopped dressing up for these sessions. There was no one to impress here, just work to be done. Richard had the initial idea in 2015, Naomi began. A cloud-based security platform for businesses. He'd been working in tech for a few years but had never started his own company. He needed capital to build a prototype and hire developers. How much capital? He asked for $5 million initially. My father agreed to $2 million. It was a significant investment for our firm. Was this investment documented? Yes. We drew up a shareholder agreement. In exchange for the $2 million, my family received 20% equity in Sterling Security Solutions. Patricia pulled out a folder and slid a document across the table. "Is this the agreement?" Naomi reviewed it, nodding. "Yes. Signed by Richard, my father, and me. I was listed as an officer of the corporation, vice president of strategic development. So you weren't just his girlfriend who happened to have access to money. You were a formal business partner." "Exactly. That was important to my father. He wouldn't invest otherwise." Helen leaned forward from her position at the end of the table, where she'd been reviewing bank statements. "When did Richard buy out your family's equity?" 2 years later, in 2017. The company had grown significantly. Richard wanted full control. He offered to buy back the 20% for $10 million. And your father accepted? Yes. It was a good return on investment. But the buyout agreement stated that I would continue as an advisor to the company, with a consulting fee and continued involvement in strategic decisions. Patricia made notes. Did Richard honor that agreement? For the first year, yes. I attended board meetings, provided strategic input, helped negotiate major contracts. But gradually he pushed me out. Stopped inviting me to meetings. Stopped seeking my advice. By 2019, I was completely excluded from business operations. Despite the consulting agreement requiring your involvement? Despite that. Helen pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. I've been tracking the company's major contract wins. The first 3 years, you can see significant growth correlated with contracts you helped secure through your family's business connections. After 2019, when you were pushed out, growth slowed. Richard talks about being a visionary leader, but the numbers show the company performed better when you were actively involved. Naomi looked at the graph Helen had created. It was true. The sharp upward trajectory of 2016 through 2018 flattened noticeably after 2019. Richard had been riding momentum she'd helped create, taking credit for growth patterns she'd initiated. We need to establish not just that you helped, Patricia said, but that your contributions were substantial and ongoing. Richard's defense will be that you were supportive, sure, but not instrumental. We need to prove you were instrumental. Trevor can testify to that, Naomi said. He was there during the founding. He saw my involvement. Trevor's testimony will be crucial. Richard burned him badly, so the defense will try to paint him as bitter and unreliable. We need to make sure his testimony is corroborated by documents. They worked through the afternoon, building the narrative of Naomi's contributions. Early emails showing her strategic advice. Meeting notes where she'd proposed ideas that became company policies. Contracts she'd negotiated. Clients she'd brought in through family connections. It was exhausting reliving those years when she'd believed in their partnership, when she'd thought Richard valued her input. Looking back now with clear eyes, she could see how gradually he'd taken her work and claimed it as his own. How smoothly he'd transitioned from thanking her privately to never acknowledging her publicly. How completely he'd erased her from the company's origin story. This is good material, Patricia said, reviewing the day's work. The judge will see that you weren't just along for the ride. You were driving. Will it be enough? Patricia looked up from her notes. Combined with the affair evidence and the hidden assets? Yes. Richard's trying to defend on multiple fronts. The prenup, the asset division, his public reputation. Each one of these fronts is weak, and together they create a pattern of bad faith. The judge will see that. Naomi hoped she was right. They had 3 weeks until the preliminary hearing, where the judge would review evidence and set terms for the divorce proceedings. Richard's attorneys had filed motion after motion trying to dismiss various claims, seal documents, prevent testimony. Patricia had fought each one. He's panicking, Patricia had said after the 5th dismissal motion. Good. Panic leads to mistakes. The mistakes were starting to show. Richard had given an interview to a tech magazine, claiming the divorce was amicable and based on irreconcilable differences. 2 days later, Naomi's attorneys released a statement detailing the adultery allegations and asset hiding. The media coverage shifted overnight from sympathetic to skeptical. Richard's company stock dropped 4%. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. Industry publications ran articles questioning his leadership and ethics. The narrative Richard had carefully constructed was crumbling, and he had no one to blame but himself. Brittany was suffering too. Her social media accounts, once filled with glamorous photos of her life as a tech executive's assistant, went private. People she'd considered friends distanced themselves. Being the other woman in a billionaire's marriage might seem exciting until the details became public. Naomi felt no sympathy for either of them. They'd made choices, pursued pleasure and profit without regard for consequences. Now the consequences were arriving, patient and thorough. Trevor came to the war room on a Thursday afternoon. He looked older than his 38 years, the price of stress and regret. But his handshake was firm and his eyes were clear. Thanks for doing this, Naomi said as they settled around the conference table. I should have done it years ago, Trevor replied. When Richard pushed me out, I could have fought. Should have fought. Instead I took the money and told myself it was fine. It wasn't fine. Why didn't you fight? Trevor was quiet for a moment. Because I was tired and he was relentless. Because his lawyers were better than mine. Because I believed him when he said if I made trouble, He'd bury me in litigation until I had nothing left. He looked at Naomi directly. You're braver than I was. I'm not brave. I'm angry. Anger's as good as courage sometimes. Patricia guided Trevor through his testimony. He described the company's early days, the long nights working on the prototype, the moment they'd landed their first major client. He described Naomi's role in detail. She wasn't window dressing, Trevor said firmly. She was our business strategist. Richard handled the technology, I handled the engineering, and Naomi handled everything else. Client relationships, investor presentations, market analysis. Without her, we'd have been another failed startup with good technology and no business sense. Did Richard acknowledge her contributions at the time? Constantly. He'd introduce her as his partner. Not girlfriend partner. He valued her input more than anyone's except maybe mine. Trevor paused. Then the company started making real money and Richard changed. Success changed him. He started believing his own press, started thinking he'd done it all himself. When did he start pushing Naomi out? Gradually. First he stopped mentioning her in interviews. Said it was better for the brand if he was the solo founder. Then he stopped inviting her to strategic meetings. Started making decisions without consulting her. By the time he pushed me out, Naomi was already mostly sidelined. Did you think that was fair? No. But I was dealing with my own problems with Richard by then. I should have said something. Should have defended her. I didn't and I regret that. Patricia typed notes as Trevor spoke. This testimony, combined with the documents Naomi has, establishes her as a founder-level contributor. That changes the entire financial picture of the divorce. They worked with Trevor for 3 hours, going over details, preparing him for cross-examination. Richard's attorneys would come at him hard, try to discredit him. But Trevor had documents too, emails and files he'd kept from the early days, proof that corroborated everything he said. After Trevor left, Naomi sat in the conference room alone for a while. The evening sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the charts and documents on the walls. Her life dissected and analyzed. Her marriage reduced to evidence and testimony. It should have felt worse than it did. Instead, she felt something like peace. This was truth, documented and verified. These were her contributions finally being recognized. This was justice, slow and methodical and thorough. Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard, "We need to talk. This has gone far enough." Naomi stared at the message. 3 months ago she would have responded immediately. Would have agreed to talk hoping they could work things out. Would have wanted to save the marriage despite everything. Now she deleted the message without responding. There was nothing to say. Everything that mattered would be said in court. The next week brought new developments. Helen finished her forensic analysis of Richard's finances. The full scope of his deception was staggering. He'd moved $63 million into hidden accounts over 3 years. He'd purchased properties in Brittany's name worth another $12 million. He'd created shell companies that existed only to obscure asset ownership. He didn't just cheat on you, Helen said, presenting her findings. He systematically stole from you. Every dollar he hid was a dollar you were entitled to as his spouse and business partner. This isn't a divorce case anymore. This is a fraud case. Patricia agreed. We can pursue criminal charges if you want. The district attorney would be interested in this level of financial fraud. Naomi considered it. Criminal charges would mean a trial, publicity, years of her life consumed by legal proceedings. It would mean watching Richard potentially go to prison, his company collapse, his reputation destroyed completely. It was tempting. But it was also exhausting just thinking about it. Let's focus on the divorce, Naomi said. Get me what I'm owed, make sure his crimes are part of the public record. The district attorney can decide if they want to prosecute. I just want to be done with him. That's reasonable, Patricia said. The civil case will accomplish everything you need. Full asset division, recognition of your contributions, and a legal record of his fraud. The court of public opinion will do the rest. The media coverage was already brutal. Tech bloggers who had once praised Richard as a visionary now questioned his business ethics. Industry analysts discussed the implications of the hidden assets. Feminist commentators wrote about the pattern of male entrepreneurs erasing their female partners' contributions. Richard's carefully constructed public image was in ruins. His company's stock continued to drop. His board discussed replacing him as CEO. Everything he'd built on lies was collapsing under the weight of truth. Brittany disappeared from public view entirely. Someone leaked that she'd been subpoenaed to testify about the asset transfers to her accounts. Her attorney released a statement claiming she'd been unaware the money came from marital assets, that Richard had told her they were his personal funds. No one believed her. Constance tried to mount a defense in the press, giving an interview where she claimed Naomi was a gold digger who had never loved Richard, only his money. Patricia's office responded with documents showing Naomi's family wealth exceeded Richard's at the time of their marriage. The interview made Constance look desperate and foolish. 3 days before the preliminary hearing, Richard called Naomi directly. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "What do you want?" "To settle this," Richard said. His voice was tired, defeated. "Tell me what you want, and let's end this without going to court. I want half of everything. I want recognition that I helped build Sterling Security Solutions. I want you to admit publicly that you hid assets and lied about my contributions." That's too much." "No, it's exactly right. It's what I'm owed." "Naomi, please. This is destroying everything. The company's value is plummeting. My reputation is gone. Can't we find a middle ground? You should have thought about that before you cheated on me, stole from me, and tried to erase me from our company's history." "I never tried to erase you." "You did. Completely. You took everything I built and claimed it as your own. You made me invisible. Now I'm making myself visible again, and you don't like what people see." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "I'll give you 40%. That's more than fair." "Half. And the admission." "I can't admit to fraud. That opens me up to criminal prosecution." "That's your problem, not mine." "Naomi." His voice changed, becoming pleading. "We loved each other once. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It meant everything to me. You're the one who treated it like nothing." She hung up. Her hands were shaking, but not from uncertainty. From anger, yes, but also from finality. That conversation was the last time she would speak to Richard outside of legal proceedings. The man she'd married was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. What remained was a stranger who happened to share her last name. For now. The preliminary hearing was 2 days away. Patricia was confident, Helen was prepared, Trevor was ready to testify. Everything they'd built over 3 months of investigation and documentation would be presented to Judge Lawrence. He would review the evidence, hear initial arguments, and set the terms for the divorce proceedings. Richard's attorneys will try to get the adultery evidence excluded, Patricia warned. They'll argue it's irrelevant to asset division. We'll counter that it's relevant to the prenup's morality clause. The judge will likely allow it. And the hidden assets? That's our strongest case. Helen's analysis is bulletproof. Richard's attorneys have tried to discredit her findings, but they can't. The money trail is too clear. What about Trevor's testimony? They'll attack his credibility, claim he's bitter about being pushed out, argue he's lying to get revenge. But we have documents supporting everything he says. His testimony isn't just words. It's corroborated facts. Naomi nodded, trying to absorb all the information. This was it. The moment when everything she'd worked for would either succeed or fail. The moment when she'd either reclaim her story or lose it forever. "Are you nervous?" Patricia asked gently. "Yes." "Good. Nervous means you care. Just remember we have the truth on our side. That matters more than money or lawyers or reputation. The truth has a weight to it. Judge Lawrence will feel it." Naomi hoped she was right. She'd bet everything on truth winning against lies. If she was wrong, if Richard's money and lawyers could obscure the facts enough to let him escape consequences, then what was the point of any of it? But she couldn't think that way. Couldn't let doubt creep in now. She'd come too far, worked too hard, exposed too much of her pain. This was the path forward, the only path that led somewhere worth going. The night before the hearing, Naomi couldn't sleep. She lay in bed in the guest room of her family's old house in Pacific Heights, staring at the ceiling. Her parents were asleep down the hall. They'd supported her through all of this, never questioned her decisions, never suggested she settle for less than she deserved. Her father had said something that stuck with her. Business is built on trust. Richard broke that trust. Now he pays the price. That's not revenge, Naomi. That's consequences. Consequences. That's what tomorrow was about. Not revenge, not punishment, but natural consequences for choices made. Richard had chosen to cheat, chosen to steal, chosen to lie. Now those choices would cost him what they should cost. Naomi got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the sleeping city. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably awake too, preparing his own arguments, planning his defense. Let him plan. Let him prepare. She had truth and patience on her side, and that was worth more than any strategy. Tomorrow would change everything. One way or another, The preliminary hearing would set the course for the rest of her life. She just had to trust that the work she'd done, the evidence she'd gathered, the truth she'd documented would be enough. It had to be enough. Because she had nothing else left to give. The morning Richard announced he wanted a divorce, Naomi was in the kitchen making coffee. It was a Tuesday in late autumn, the kind of clear, cold morning San Francisco did well. She'd spent the previous evening reviewing documents with Patricia, building their case piece by piece. Richard didn't know that. He thought she was home being the obedient wife, accepting his absence without question. He walked into the kitchen wearing one of his expensive suits, the navy one he saved for important meetings. His face had the determined expression he wore when making business decisions he expected resistance on. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Naomi poured her coffee calmly, not turning around. "About what?" "About our marriage. Naomi, this isn't working. We both know it. I think it's time we consider ending things amicably before we start to resent each other." She did turn then, coffee mug in hand, looking at her husband with new eyes. He thought he was delivering surprising news. He thought she'd be shocked, maybe cry, maybe beg him to reconsider. He had no idea she'd been 3 steps ahead for months. "You want a divorce," she said flatly. "I think it's best for both of us. We've grown apart. You're not happy, I'm not happy. The prenup makes it simple. We can handle this quickly and painlessly." Painlessly? Naomi almost laughed. "For whom?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "For both of us. Look, I'll be fair. More than fair. You'll be taken care of financially. You won't have to worry about money. How generous of you. To take care of me with money I helped you earn. Naomi, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The prenup is clear. What's mine remains mine. But I'm willing to give you a settlement beyond what the prenup requires. 200,000, maybe more. That's more than enough to start fresh. 200,000. Out of a fortune worth over 300 million. Out of a company she'd helped build. Out of assets she'd helped accumulate. He was offering her less than 1% and calling it generous. "And Brittany?" Naomi asked. "Does she get a settlement too?" Richard's face changed, the mask of reasonable businessperson slipping. "What does Brittany have to do with this?" "Everything. This divorce isn't about us growing apart, Richard. It's about you wanting to legitimize your affair. It's about you moving your mistress into my life without the inconvenience of me being in it. You're being paranoid. I have photos. Hotel receipts. Bank records showing you've been paying for her apartment, her car, her lifestyle. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the asset transfers. I know everything." Richard went pale. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been paying attention. Finally. You should have been more careful, Richard. Or maybe you should have valued your wife enough not to cheat on her in the first place." He recovered quickly, the businessman in him taking over. "Fine. You know about Brittany. That doesn't change the prenup. You signed it. It's legally binding. You get what it says you get, and that's that. The prenup has a morality clause. You voided it when you committed adultery. That will never hold up in court. We'll see." Richard stared at her, reevaluating. This wasn't the wife he'd expected. The quiet, accommodating woman who never made waves was gone, replaced by someone harder. Someone who had done her homework. "You can't fight this, Naomi," he said, his voice dropping into a threatening tone. "I have the best attorneys in the state. I'll bury you in legal fees until you have nothing left. I have good attorneys too. And unlike you, I haven't been hiding assets to pay for them. Everything I spend on this divorce comes out of marital funds, which means you're paying for me to take you down. Think about that." She walked past him, leaving her coffee on the counter. The conversation was over. She'd said what needed saying, established that she wasn't going to roll over quietly. The rest would play out in court. Richard called after her. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are. Gold digger. Social climber. Woman who only married me for my money." Naomi stopped at the doorway looking back at him. "My family had more money than you when we met. My business degree is from Wharton. My connections opened doors you couldn't have opened alone. So if you want to tell people I'm a gold digger, go ahead. The facts won't support you." She left him standing in the kitchen, probably already on the phone with his attorneys, probably already planning his counterattack. Let him plan. She had plans of her own, and they were further along than he imagined. 2 days later, moving trucks arrived at the house. Not for Naomi. For Brittany. Richard was moving his mistress into their home while the divorce proceedings began, a move so audacious it would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. Naomi watched from her car as Brittany directed movers, pointing at rooms claiming spaces. The woman was 26 and wearing designer clothes Naomi recognized from Richard's credit card statements. She moved through Naomi's home like she owned it, like 8 years of marriage could be erased with moving boxes and a billionaire's arrogance. Patricia called as Naomi sat there watching. Did you know he was moving her in? I do now. I'm parked across the street watching it happen. That's bold of him. Stupid but bold. Patricia paused. It actually helps our case. Shows lack of respect for the marriage, supports the adultery claim. The judge will note it. It feels like a violation. It is a violation. But don't engage Naomi. Don't go in there and confront them. Let them be stupid. Let them get comfortable. Their confidence will hurt them later. Naomi agreed and drove away. Going into the house would solve nothing. It wasn't her home anymore anyway. She'd already moved most of her personal belongings to her parents' house. What remained were things that belonged to the life she was leaving behind. The charity event happened a week later. It was the annual tech industry gala, the kind of event Naomi had attended every year since marrying Richard. This year she planned to skip it, but Patricia suggested otherwise. Show your face. Show you're not hiding. Show you're not ashamed. Richard will expect you to hide. Don't give him that satisfaction. So Naomi went, wearing a red dress that made her feel powerful. She arrived alone, walked in with her head high, and immediately felt the whispers start. Everyone knew about the divorce. Everyone knew about the affair. Everyone was watching to see how she'd handle it. Richard was there with Brittany, of course. His arm around her waist, making a statement. Brittany wore a blue dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, her hand possessively on Richard's chest. They looked like a couple in love, two people who belonged together. Constance spotted Naomi first. Richard's mother cut across the room with the determination of a missile seeking its target, her pearls bouncing with each step. You have some nerve showing up here, Constance hissed when she reached Naomi. After what you're doing to my son. After the lies you're spreading. I haven't lied about anything. Everything in the court filings is true and documented. You're trying to destroy him. Trying to take everything he's worked for. Everything we worked for, Naomi corrected. I helped build that company, Constance. You just refused to see it. You were a spouse. That's all. You don't get to claim credit for his genius. His genius used my family's money and my business connections. Those are facts, not claims. People were gathering now, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Constance's voice was rising, drawing attention. Naomi kept hers level, refusing to match the older woman's anger. You ungrateful, grasping woman, Constance said, loud enough now that heads were turning openly. My son gave you everything. A home, status, a place in society. And this is how you repay him. By trying to steal his money. His money? Naomi felt her own anger rising but kept it controlled. Tell me, Constance, where did Richard get his startup capital? Who funded Sterling Security Solutions when it was just an idea? He bootstrapped. He worked hard. He used my family's $2 million investment. That's documented. Public record. He didn't bootstrap anything. He used my money to build his empire. Constance's face went red. That's a lie. It's in the incorporation documents. Ask Richard's attorneys. They've seen them. Before Constance could respond, Richard appeared, Brittany still attached to his side. His face was tight with controlled fury. Mother, that's enough, he said, taking Constance's arm. Let's not make a scene. A scene? Naomi looked at Brittany directly for the first time. The younger woman met her eyes with a mixture of defiance and uncertainty. Your mistress is wearing my jewelry, Richard. The diamond necklace you gave me for our 5th anniversary. You gave it to her. And you're worried about a scene? Brittany's hand flew to the necklace and her face paled. She hadn't known. Or maybe she had and hadn't cared. Either way, everyone around them now knew. The whispers grew louder. That necklace is mine, Richard said. I bought it. I can give it to whomever I want. You bought it with marital funds during our marriage. That makes it marital property. Which means she's wearing stolen property. You're insane, Brittany said, her voice shaking. Richard loves me. He wants to be with me. You just can't accept that. Richard loves your youth, Naomi replied calmly. He loves that you make him feel important and don't question his decisions. He loved me once too, back when I was useful to him. Give it time. You'll stop being useful eventually. That's enough, Richard said, his voice hard. You're embarrassing yourself, Naomi. I'm telling the truth. If that embarrasses you, that's your problem. She walked away then, leaving them standing there with everyone staring. It felt good, being direct, being honest, refusing to be polite and accommodating anymore. Let them deal with the social fallout. She was done protecting Richard's reputation. The rest of the evening was surreal. People approached Naomi with cautious sympathy, not sure what to say. Some offered support, others pretended nothing was wrong. A few brave souls directly asked about the divorce, and Naomi gave them honest answers. Richard was having an affair. Richard had hidden assets. The case would be decided in court. By the end of the night, the story was everywhere. Social media lit up with accounts from attendees. The confrontation between Naomi and Constance. The revelation about the necklace. Richard's obvious discomfort. It was a public relations disaster for him, and he'd walked right into it by bringing Brittany to an event everyone knew his wife might attend. Patricia called the next morning, laughing. "I don't know whether to thank you or scold you. That was quite a performance." "I wasn't performing. I was just being honest." "Well, your honesty cost Richard a few more points in public opinion. His stock dropped another 2% this morning. The board is getting nervous." "Good." The other good news is that confrontation establishes Brittany's knowledge of the affair publicly. She can't claim she didn't know Richard was married now. Everyone saw them together, acting like a couple while you're still legally his wife. So it helps the case? Everything helps the case, Naomi. Every mistake they make, every public display, every arrogant assumption that they can do what they want without consequences. It all builds the narrative that Richard is reckless and dishonest. Judges notice those things. Over the following weeks, Richard's attacks escalated. His attorneys filed motions claiming Naomi was attempting to destroy his business for vindictive reasons. They claimed she'd never been involved in company operations beyond social support. They claimed the hidden accounts were legitimate business structures. Patricia countered each motion with documentation. Trevor's testimony. Email records. Financial analysis from Helen. Meeting notes showing Naomi's strategic input. Everything Richard tried to deny they proved. Richard gave another interview, this time to a business channel. He portrayed himself as a victim of a bitter ex-wife who couldn't accept that their marriage had ended. He spoke about building his company through hard work and sacrifice. He didn't mention Naomi's family's investment or her contributions. He didn't mention Brittany or the affair. The interview backfired. Viewers saw a wealthy man playing victim, complaining about the woman trying to claim what she was owed. Social media turned against him. Believe Women trended. Pay Your Wife became a hashtag. Richard's carefully crafted image as a tech visionary crumbled under scrutiny. His company's board met again. This time they didn't just discuss. They acted. Richard was removed as CEO, remaining only as chairman with significantly reduced power. The board cited concerns about his judgment and the ongoing legal proceedings' impact on company stability. Richard called Naomi after the board meeting, his voice raw with fury. "Are you happy now? You've destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything. You did that yourself. The board removed me because of your lies. Because of this divorce circus you created. The board removed you because you committed fraud and adultery and those things became public. I didn't make you do those things, Richard. You chose them. I built that company. Me. And you're taking it away. We built that company. Together. You just forgot that part." He hung up on her. It was the last direct conversation they'd have before the preliminary hearing. Everything else would go through attorneys, formal and legal and distant. Brittany disappeared from social media entirely after the charity event. Her accounts went dark, her presence erased. She was learning, perhaps, what it meant to be the other woman in a high-profile divorce. The glamour faded when consequences arrived. Constance tried one more time to intervene, showing up at Naomi's parents' house unannounced. Naomi's father turned her away at the door, polite but firm. "This is a legal matter," Charles Washington told her. "It will be resolved in court. Your son made choices. Now he faces consequences. That's life." The confrontations, the public battles, the attempts at intimidation. They were all Richard and his allies trying to make Naomi back down, trying to make her accept less than she deserved. But each attempt only strengthened her resolve. Each attack reminded her why she was doing this, what she was fighting for. The night before the preliminary hearing, Naomi received a letter. Not from Richard's attorneys but from Richard himself. Handwritten, which surprised her. She almost didn't read it, but curiosity won. The letter was long, rambling in places. Richard talked about the early days of their relationship, the happiness they'd shared. He apologized for the affair, called it a mistake born of stress and ambition. He asked her to reconsider the divorce, suggested they could work things out, rebuild what they'd lost. He offered her 30% of marital assets if she'd agree to drop the fraud allegations and keep the divorce quiet. He promised to acknowledge her contributions publicly if she'd settle. He even suggested they could remain friends, co-investors in the company they'd built together. Naomi read the letter twice, looking for sincerity, finding only desperation. Richard wasn't sorry for hurting her. He was sorry for getting caught. Sorry for the consequences damaging his reputation and his wealth. The letter was manipulation disguised as reconciliation. She burned it in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken. No more manipulation. No more lies accepted as truth. No more settling for less than she deserved. Tomorrow, the preliminary hearing would begin the formal process of ending their marriage and dividing their assets. Tomorrow, Richard would face Judge Lawrence and try to defend the indefensible. Tomorrow, truth would have its day in court. Naomi went to bed feeling calm, almost peaceful. Everything she'd worked for had led to this moment. Whatever happened tomorrow, she'd know she'd fought for herself, refused to disappear quietly, demanded to be seen and valued. That was worth more than money. More than revenge. It was worth everything. Trevor Banks lived in a modest apartment in Oakland, a far cry from the Silicon Valley lifestyle he could have had if Richard hadn't pushed him out of Sterling Security Solutions. When Naomi arrived for their second meeting, 3 months after the initial phone call, Trevor greeted her with coffee and cautious optimism. "I've been thinking about what you're trying to do," Trevor said as they sat at his kitchen table. "Taking on Richard in court, exposing what he did. It's going to get ugly." "I know. He'll come after you with everything. Reputation attacks, financial pressure, legal warfare. He destroyed me without blinking. He'll try to do worse to you. Let him try. I have something you didn't have when you faced him. I have documentation. Proof. A paper trail he was stupid enough to leave." Trevor smiled slightly. "You've changed. The Naomi I knew was quieter. More accommodating." That Naomi believed in marriage and partnership. This Naomi knows what those words actually mean, and that Richard never understood them. They spent the afternoon going through Trevor's files. He'd kept more than Naomi expected. Emails from the company's early days showing collaboration between the three of them, Richard, Trevor, and Naomi. Meeting notes where Naomi's strategic suggestions had shaped company direction. Financial documents showing the initial investment from her family. "Why did you keep all this?" Naomi asked, looking at the careful organization of files. "Insurance," Trevor said. "When Richard pushed me out, I knew something wasn't right. The way he rewrote history, claiming he built everything alone. I kept the files in case I ever needed to prove otherwise. And now I need to prove otherwise." "Yeah. Richard's pattern is to erase people who helped him. I was erased from the company's founding story. Now he's trying to erase you from the marriage story. But we both have proof he's lying." Trevor's testimony would be critical. Not just because he witnessed Naomi's contributions, but because his own experience with Richard established a pattern. Richard had betrayed multiple partners, claimed credit for others' work, and rewritten history to center himself. One instance could be disputed. A pattern was harder to deny. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Naomi asked. "Testifying means putting yourself back in Richard's crosshairs. He'll attack your credibility." "I'm sure. I should have fought him years ago. Maybe if I had, you wouldn't be going through this now." Trevor paused, looking at the files spread across his table. "Besides, I'm tired of him getting away with it. He destroys people and suffers no consequences. That needs to end." Naomi hired Helen Rodriguez on Patricia's recommendation. Helen was a forensic accountant who specialized in finding hidden assets in divorce cases. She'd worked on dozens of high-profile cases, including several involving tech executives who thought they were clever enough to hide money from their spouses. "They're never as clever as they think," Helen said during their first meeting. Her office was cluttered with financial documents, computer screens showing spreadsheets and data visualizations. "Rich men hide assets the same ways poor men do. They just use more expensive tools to do it." Helen explained the process. She'd need access to all of Naomi and Richard's financial records. Bank statements, investment accounts, business documents, tax returns. Everything. Then she'd trace the money, following transactions across accounts and companies, looking for patterns that suggested hidden wealth. "How long will it take?" Naomi asked. "Depends on how much he's hiding and how well he hid it. Based on what you've told me about the offshore accounts and shell companies, I'd estimate 6 to 8 weeks for a preliminary analysis. Longer if we need to dig deeper." "And you'll find everything?" Helen smiled. I always do. Money leaves traces. Always. Doesn't matter how many accounts he opened or how many companies he created. If he moved it, I can track it. The next weeks became a rhythm of information gathering. Naomi provided Helen with every financial document she could access. Patricia subpoenaed more from Sterling Security Solutions, forcing the company to turn over records Richard would have preferred stayed private. Trevor added his own documentation showing financial patterns from the company's early days. Helen worked with the focus of someone solving a puzzle. She'd call Naomi with questions. This transfer on March 15, 2020, do you remember what it was for? Or, these payments to Sterling Solutions LLC, did you know about this company? Each question led to more investigation, more discovery. 4 weeks into Helen's analysis, she called Naomi with excitement in her voice. I found it. The whole network. It's beautiful in a terrible way. They met at Patricia's office. Helen had created a visual chart showing the flow of money from Sterling Security Solutions to various shell companies, then to offshore accounts, then to properties and investments in Brittany's name. It looked like a spider web, complex and interconnected. He's been doing this for 3 years, Helen said, pointing at the chart. Started small, testing whether anyone would notice. When no one did, he got bolder. The amounts increased. The frequency increased. By last year, he was moving millions every quarter. How much total? Patricia asked. Conservatively, 63 million. Could be more once I finish the complete analysis. Naomi stared at the chart. $63 million. More than enough to fund a lifetime for Richard and Brittany. More than enough to leave Naomi with nothing if she hadn't discovered it. This is criminal fraud, Patricia said. Not just civil. Criminal. The district attorney would prosecute this. But we don't need criminal prosecution to win the divorce case, Helen added. This evidence alone voids the prenup and establishes grounds for unequal asset division in Naomi's favor. Combined with Trevor's testimony about her contributions, she's looking at majority control of marital assets. Majority control. Not just half but more. Punishment for Richard's fraud built into the asset division. Justice not just in recognition but in financial terms. What about Brittany? Naomi asked. The properties in her name? Those properties were purchased with marital funds, which makes them marital assets regardless of whose name is on the deed. We'll demand they be sold and proceeds divided. Brittany will fight it but she'll lose. She accepted stolen property knowingly or not. Another ally appeared unexpectedly. Margaret Chin, a former employee of Sterling Security Solutions, reached out through Patricia's office. Margaret had been director of human resources until Richard fired her 6 months ago for reasons he'd never fully explained. I know why he fired me, Margaret said when she met with Naomi and Patricia. I questioned expense reports showing Richard's business trips with Brittany. Hotel suites, expensive dinners, charges that looked personal not professional. I asked for justification. Instead of providing it, Richard eliminated my position. Do you still have those expense reports? Copies, yes. I kept everything. Corporate policy required 7-year retention of financial documents. I followed policy even after being fired. Margaret's expense reports corroborated the affair timeline. They showed Richard and Brittany traveling together constantly, staying in the same hotels, charging personal expenses to corporate accounts. It was evidence that Richard had violated not just his marriage vows but his fiduciary duty to the company and its shareholders. The board will want to see this, Margaret said. They might not care about Richard's marriage, but they care about company funds being misused. This could support shareholder lawsuits. Patricia took the expense reports with gratitude. You've given us evidence that helps on multiple fronts. The divorce, potential criminal charges, and shareholder complaints. Richard's legal problems are multiplying. Good, Margaret said simply. He's a narcissist who destroys anyone who questions him. I lost my career because I did my job. I'm happy to help take him down. The allies were gathering. Trevor with his knowledge of company history. Helen with her forensic accounting skills. Margaret with her documentation of company fund misuse. Each person brought pieces of the puzzle, filling gaps in the case Naomi was building. Patricia coordinated everyone, keeping evidence organized, preparing testimony, anticipating Richard's defenses. She'd handled dozens of divorces, but she said this one was special. Everything is documented, Patricia told Naomi during one of their strategy sessions. Usually in these cases we have some evidence and have to rely on testimony to fill gaps. Here we have evidence for everything. Bank records, emails, witness statements, expense reports. Richard can't deny anything without looking like a liar. He'll still try to deny it. Of course he will. His ego won't let him admit wrongdoing. But the evidence doesn't care about his ego. Richard's attorneys tried to fight the information gathering. They filed motions to limit discovery, claiming the requests were overly broad and harassing. They tried to prevent Trevor from testifying, arguing he was biased. They tried to exclude Helen's analysis, calling it speculative. Judge Lawrence denied every motion. Mr. Sterling opened the door to these inquiries by claiming his assets were separate and protected by the prenup. Judge Lawrence said during one hearing, "Mrs. Sterling has the right to verify those claims. Discovery will proceed." The preliminary hearing was approaching. In legal terms, it was just the first step, establishing parameters for the divorce proceedings. But symbolically, it would be the moment when everything became public. When Richard's private sins became public record. When Naomi's contributions were formally acknowledged by the court. Her father called the night before, checking on her emotional state. Charles Washington had watched his daughter transform over the past months, from a hurt wife to a determined warrior. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm good, Dad. Nervous but good. You've done remarkable work on this case. Your mother and I are proud of you. You taught me to fight for what's right. This is me doing that. Richard underestimated you. He thought you'd accept his narrative, take what he offered, and disappear. He was wrong. He was wrong about a lot of things." Her father paused. "Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you've already won the important part. You refuse to be erased. You refuse to accept injustice. That takes courage most people never find." Naomi felt tears threaten but held them back. "Thanks, Dad." After they hung up, she reviewed her notes one more time. The testimony she'd given Patricia. The evidence they'd present. The questions she'd be asked. Everything was prepared, but she still felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. For 8 years, Richard had controlled the narrative of their relationship, their business, their life together. Tomorrow, Naomi would tell a different story. A true story. And Richard would have to sit there and listen while his lies were exposed one by one. Sleep came eventually, restless but sufficient. When Naomi woke, the sun was bright through her curtains. She dressed carefully in her blue silk dress, the one that made her feel powerful. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the woman who'd married Richard Sterling 8 years ago. This was someone new, someone forged by betrayal and determination and the choice to fight rather than flee. She was ready. Ready for the courtroom, ready for the confrontation, ready for the truth to finally matter more than money or reputation or carefully constructed lies. Patricia texted, "See you there. We're going to do great." Naomi texted back, "I know." And she did know. Not because victory was guaranteed, but because she'd done everything possible to earn it. The rest was up to the judge, the evidence, and the simple power of truth told plainly. She drove to the courthouse alone, refusing her parents' offer to come with her. This was her fight. She needed to face it on her own terms. The building loomed ahead, stone and glass and authority. Inside those walls, her life would change. She'd either reclaim what was hers or learn that justice was a fairy tale. But she didn't believe it was a fairy tale. Not anymore. She believed in documentation, evidence, and the cumulative weight of facts. She believed in Trevor's testimony, Helen's analysis, Margaret's expense reports. She believed in her own story finally being told without someone talking over her. Richard's car was already in the parking lot. He'd arrived early, probably conferring with his attorneys, probably confident he'd find a way to win despite everything. Let him be confident. Confidence had led to carelessness, and carelessness had created the evidence that would defeat him. Naomi walked into the courthouse with her head high, her steps steady, and her heart full of the kind of courage that comes from knowing you've done the work. Whatever happened next, she'd done the work. And that mattered more than anything Richard Sterling could say or do. Patricia's office felt different the day she called Naomi in for the prenup revelation. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Patricia sat behind her desk wearing the expression of someone holding a winning lottery ticket. "Sit down," Patricia said. "You're going to want to sit down for this." Naomi settled into the leather chair across from Patricia's desk. "Is it good news or bad news?" "The best news. I've spent the last 3 weeks with a fine-tooth comb going through your prenuptial agreement. Not just reading it but analyzing every clause, every subsection, every piece of legal language. And Naomi, This document is not what Richard thinks it is. Patricia pulled out a thick folder, opening it to reveal the prenup with sections highlighted in different colors. Yellow, green, pink, blue. It looked like a rainbow had attacked the document. Richard's attorneys drafted this prenup to protect his interests. They did a thorough job in many ways. But they made two critical errors, probably because they never imagined you'd have grounds to challenge it or access to attorneys who'd look this closely. What errors? First, the morality clause we discussed. It's broader than Richard realizes. It doesn't just void the prenup in cases of adultery. It voids it for any serious ethical violation including fraud, material dishonesty, or illegal activity during the marriage. Patricia tapped the yellow highlighted section. Richard's hidden assets constitute fraud. Even without proving adultery, the fraud alone voids the entire prenup. Naomi felt hope rise in her chest. What's the second error? The spousal contribution clause. This is rarer in prenups, but Richard's attorneys included it, probably thinking it protected him if he tried to claim credit for his business success. Patricia smiled. What they didn't anticipate is that you actually did contribute substantially. This clause requires the court to consider non-financial contributions to business success when dividing assets. Normally these clauses favor the working spouse. But you weren't just a stay-at-home spouse. You were actively involved in building sterling security solutions. Patricia pulled out another document, this one showing a timeline. We can prove your contributions through multiple sources. Trevor's testimony about your strategic role in the company's early years. Email records showing your involvement in major decisions. Client contacts you brought in through your family connections. The initial investment from your family that funded the startup. So the clause that was supposed to protect Richard actually protects me? Exactly. Because you contributed substantially, and we can document it, the court must recognize those contributions in the asset division. Combined with the fraud voiding the prenup entirely, we're looking at a situation where standard community property laws apply. In California, that means 50-50 division of all marital assets. Naomi processed this. 50%. Half of everything. Not the tiny settlement Richard had offered. Not the pittance he thought the prenup gave him the right to pay. Half of a fortune he tried to keep for himself. But wait, there's more, Patricia said, her smile widening. The fraud doesn't just void the prenup. It gives us grounds to argue for unequal division in your favor. When one spouse deliberately hides assets and commits fraud, California courts can award the innocent spouse more than half as a penalty. We're going to argue you deserve 60%, maybe more. Will the judge actually award that? With the evidence we have? Helen's forensic analysis showing systematic fraud over 3 years? The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the properties in Brittany's name purchased with marital funds? Yes, I think Judge Lawrence will award unequal division. He has discretion in fraud cases and judges hate being lied to. Richard lied extensively. Patricia showed Naomi another highlighted section, this one in green. There's also a bad faith provision. If either party negotiates the prenup in bad faith, fails to disclose assets, or includes provisions they know are unenforceable, the entire document can be invalidated. Richard had you sign this prenup 3 days before your wedding, without giving you time to have independent counsel review it. That's borderline coercion. He also didn't fully disclose his business plans or the value he expected the company to reach. That's bad faith. So even without the fraud and the morality clause, the prenup might not hold up? Correct. We have 3 separate grounds to invalidate it. The morality clause violation, the fraud, and the bad faith negotiation. Any one of these could void it. All 3 together make it ironclad that the prenup won't protect Richard. Naomi felt something shift inside her. 4 months she'd been fighting against the prenup, seeing it as an obstacle. Now Patricia was telling her the prenup itself was the weapon that would defeat Richard. Why didn't Richard's attorneys catch these problems? Naomi asked. Because they drafted it assuming you'd never challenge it. They assumed you'd be the compliant spouse who'd sign divorce papers without fighting. They assumed Richard would never give you grounds to invoke the morality clause. They assumed wrong on all counts. Patricia pulled out one more document. This is the most interesting part. I had an expert review the prenup's drafting. Guess what he found? What? The morality clause and spousal contribution clause weren't in the original draft. They were added at Richard's request during negotiations. His attorney advised against including them, said they created vulnerabilities. But Richard insisted. He wanted the morality clause because he worried about you having an affair. He wanted the contribution clause because he wanted credit for being the primary earner. His own paranoia and ego created the tools we're using to defeat him. Naomi laughed, an unexpected sound in the serious atmosphere. He did this to himself. He absolutely did. The prenup he thought was protecting him is actually destroying his case. And he has no one to blame but himself. They spent the next 2 hours going through every implication of the prenup analysis. Patricia explained how she'd present it to the judge, how she'd counter Richard's attorney's arguments, how the evidence supported each claim. Richard's attorneys will argue the fraud wasn't that serious, that moving money to offshore accounts is common business practice. We'll show that he lied about it, hid it from you, and used it to prepare for a divorce where he'd keep everything. That's fraud with intent to harm you financially. What about the morality clause? Will they argue the affair doesn't count? They'll try. They'll say personal relationships don't fall under contract law, that the clause is unenforceable. But California courts have upheld morality clauses in prenups many times. As long as we prove the affair, which we can, the clause applies. And the contribution clause? That's where Trevor's testimony becomes critical. Richard will claim you were supportive but not instrumental. Trevor will testify you were instrumental. Your emails and documentation support Trevor. The judge will have to decide who's credible. Based on everything we have, you're credible. Richard's a proven liar. Naomi felt the pieces falling into place. The prenup she'd feared was becoming her greatest advantage. The document Richard had insisted on, had pressured her to sign, had thought protected him, was actually the key to her victory. When do we present this to the court? At the preliminary hearing. We'll file our brief analyzing the prenup 3 days before. Richard's attorneys will get copies and they're going to panic. They've been building their entire defense on the prenup being valid. When they realize it's not, their whole strategy collapses. Will they try to settle? Almost certainly. Once they see how weak their position is, they'll push Richard to settle. Offer you 40%, maybe 45%. We'll refuse. We're going for 60% plus acknowledgement of your contributions. We settle for nothing less than 50. Patricia leaned back in her chair, looking satisfied. Naomi, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've handled hundreds of high-net-worth divorces. This is one of the strongest cases I've ever seen for an unfavorable spouse challenging a prenup and winning. You have everything. Documentation, credible witnesses, evidence of fraud, grounds to void the prenup multiple ways. Richard's attorneys know they're in trouble. They're just hoping you don't realize how good your position is. I realize it now. Good. Because the preliminary hearing is when we make our stand. When we show the judge exactly what Richard did and why he deserves to lose not just half but more than half. When we prove you weren't just his wife but his partner, and partners deserve equal treatment. Naomi stood up, feeling lighter than she had in months. Thank you, Patricia, for seeing what was there. For finding the weaknesses in something Richard thought was strong. That's my job. And honestly, this one's a pleasure. Too many times I see prenups that are actually ironclad, and the spouse getting divorced has no recourse. This time, the prenup was written poorly and the other spouse commit. Defraud. It's almost too easy. It doesn't feel easy. The legal part is easy. The emotional part, I know that's hard. But you're doing great, Naomi. You're staying focused, staying strong. In a few weeks, this will all be over and you'll have the recognition and the assets you deserve. Naomi left Patricia's office and drove aimlessly for a while, processing everything. The prenup that had haunted her for months was revealed to be full of holes. The document Richard had insisted she sign without proper review was the document that would defeat him. She thought about the young woman she'd been 8 years ago, signing papers she didn't fully understand because she trusted the man she loved. That woman had been naive, yes, but she'd also been trusting and hopeful. Richard had taken advantage of that trust, but he'd been careless in his exploitation. The prenup he'd pressured her to sign without independent counsel review was, legally speaking, a disaster. Her phone rang. Trevor's name appeared on the screen. Patricia called me, Trevor said when she answered. Told me about the prenup analysis. This is huge, Naomi. He's going to lose everything he thought was protected. It feels surreal. For months I've been fighting against this prenup, and now it's helping me. That's karma. Richard thought he was so smart, covering all his bases. He forgot that smart people review their own documents carefully. He trusted his attorneys to protect him, but they drafted something with holes in it. Patricia says your testimony about my contributions is critical to making the spousal contribution clause work. I'll testify to everything. Your strategic input, your client connections, your family's investment. All of it. Richard wanted to erase you from the company's story, but I was there. I saw what you did. The judge will hear the truth. They talked for a few more minutes, Trevor offering encouragement, Naomi accepting it gratefully. When they hung up, she drove to the beach, needing to think. The ocean was gray and vast, waves rolling in with patient rhythm. Naomi sat on a bench and watched the water, thinking about marriage and money and justice. She'd married Richard believing in partnership, in building something together. He'd turned their marriage into a business arrangement that favored him exclusively. But he'd been sloppy, arrogant. He'd assumed she'd never fight, never question, never look closely at the documents he'd asked her to sign. His assumptions had created vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities were now becoming his downfall. The preliminary hearing was 5 days away. In 5 days, Patricia would present their analysis of the prenup to Judge Lawrence. Richard's attorneys would try to defend it, but the flaws were undeniable. The fraud was documented. The morality clause violations were proven. The bad faith negotiation was obvious. Richard would sit in that courtroom and realize his protection was gone. The legal shield he'd thought would keep him wealthy while divorcing his wife was actually a weapon pointed at him. His own paranoia and ego, insisting on clauses his attorney advised against, had created the tools being used to defeat him. Naomi thought about calling him, telling him what she'd learned. Giving him a chance to settle before the hearing, before the prenup analysis became part of the public record. But she decided against it. Richard had made his choices. He'd hidden assets, committed fraud, betrayed their marriage. He deserved to face the consequences unprepared. Let him walk into that courtroom confident. Let him believe his prenup would save him. Let him discover the truth the hard way, in front of a judge, in front of Brittany, in front of his mother. Let him feel what she'd felt, learning her marriage was a lie. The surprise would be devastating, and maybe devastation was what Richard needed to finally understand what he'd done. She watched the waves for another hour, finding peace in their rhythm. Everything was in motion now, unstoppable. The hearing would happen, the evidence would be presented, the judge would rule. Naomi had done everything possible to prepare. The rest was up to justice, truth, and the simple fact that Richard had written his own defeat into a document he'd thought protected him. Sometimes the universe had a sense of irony. Richard's prenup, meant to keep Naomi powerless, was the thing that would give her power. His paranoia about her potential affairs had created a morality clause she could use against his actual affair. His desire for credit as the primary earner had created a contribution clause that recognized her actual contributions. He'd built his own trap and now he was walking into it. Naomi just had to watch it close around him. 5 days until the preliminary hearing. 5 days until Richard learned the truth about his prenup. 5 days until everything changed. Naomi stood up from the bench, looking out at the ocean one more time. The waves kept coming, patient and persistent. That's what she'd been, patient and persistent. Gathering evidence, building her case, refusing to give up or settle for less than she deserved. The patience was about to pay off. The persistence was about to yield results. And Richard Sterling, the man who'd thought he was smart enough to control everything, was about to learn that some things couldn't be controlled. Justice, when it finally arrived, came for everyone. Even billionaires. Even men who thought they were untouchable. Even husbands who'd forgotten their wives were people, not possessions. The preliminary hearing would prove that. And Naomi would be there to see it happen. The prenup analysis hit Richard's attorneys like a bomb 3 days before the preliminary hearing. Patricia filed it with the court at exactly 9 a.m. on Monday morning, giving Richard's legal team 72 hours to prepare a response. By noon, Naomi's phone was ringing. She let it go to voicemail. Richard's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to talk. My attorneys say there are problems with the prenup. This is ridiculous. Just call me back so we can discuss this like adults." She deleted the message. They'd been discussing it like adults for months. Now they'd discuss it in court. 2 hours later, another voicemail. This time Richard's attorney, speaking in the carefully neutral tone lawyers used when delivering bad news. "Ms. Washington, this is Robert Chen from Morrison & Associates. We've reviewed the prenup analysis filed by your counsel. We'd like to schedule a settlement conference before the hearing. Please have Ms. Monroe contact our office at her earliest convenience." A settlement conference. That's what happened when attorneys realized their case was falling apart. Patricia had predicted this, had told Naomi to expect settlement offers once Richard's team understood how weak their position was. "Don't accept anything less than 50%, Patricia had said. "They'll offer 40, maybe 45. Hold firm. We're in the stronger position." Richard's third call came at dinner time. Naomi was at her parents' house, pushing food around her plate while her mother watched with concern. Eat something, her mother said gently. You need your strength. I'm not hungry. Nerves? Anticipation. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered, putting it on speaker so her parents could hear. Naomi, Richard said, his voice different now. Less angry, more desperate. Please, can we just talk? Face to face? Without lawyers. Everything goes through Patricia now. You know that. This isn't about lawyers. This is about us. About 8 years of marriage. That has to mean something. It meant something to me. Past tense. You made sure it stopped meaning anything when you decided Brittany was more important than our marriage vows. That was a mistake. I told you that. But destroying everything because of one mistake seems extreme. Naomi's father made a disgusted sound. Charles Washington had limited patience for men who called years of infidelity a single mistake. One mistake. Naomi repeated. Richard, you had an affair for over a year. You hid millions of dollars in offshore accounts. You transferred marital assets to your girlfriend's name. You systematically planned to divorce me while keeping everything for yourself. Those aren't mistakes. Those are crimes. The prenup is valid. Your attorneys are just trying to scare us into settling. Then don't settle. Let the judge decide. I'm comfortable with that. Silence on the line. Then quietly, my attorneys think we should settle. Then you should probably listen to them. 40%. I'll give you 40% of marital assets, plus the house in Pacific Heights. That's generous, Naomi. More than generous. Half. Plus acknowledgement that I contributed substantially to Sterling Security Solutions' success. Plus a public statement that the affair happened and the hidden assets were fraudulent. That's my settlement terms. That's insane. I can't admit to fraud publicly. Then we go to trial. The judge hears all the evidence, makes it part of public record and rules accordingly. Your choice. Richard's breathing was harsh over the phone. You're doing this for revenge. To hurt me. I'm doing this for justice. For recognition. For what I'm actually owed. The fact that it hurts you is just a side effect. She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice had been steady. That mattered. Staying calm, staying firm, refusing to be manipulated by guilt or nostalgia. Good, her father said approvingly. He's scrambling. That means your attorneys did their job. He still thinks he can negotiate his way out of this, her mother added. Men like Richard always think they can talk their way around consequences. The next day Constance tried. She appeared at Naomi's parents' house in the morning, dressed like she was attending a funeral. Pearls, black dress, expression of grim determination. Charles Washington answered the door. Mrs. Sterling. What can I do for you? I need to speak with Naomi. It's urgent. Naomi doesn't want to speak with you. This is important. Family business. Naomi's not part of your family anymore. She's getting divorced from your son. Whatever you need to say can go through her attorney. Constance's face hardened. Mr. Washington, I'm trying to prevent a disaster here. Your daughter is about to ruin my son's life. I thought you'd want to help stop that. My daughter is about to get what she deserves. If that ruins your son's life, he ruined it himself. She's taking advantage of a few mistakes to steal his fortune. She's reclaiming her share of a fortune she helped build. There's a difference. Naomi appeared behind her father, drawn by the raised voices. It's okay, Dad. I'll talk to her. Charles looked uncertain, but Naomi nodded. He stepped aside, letting Constance enter. They went to the living room, Naomi sitting while Constance remained standing, as if sitting would acknowledge Naomi's position. You have to stop this, Constance said without preamble. This lawsuit, this divorce, it's destroying Richard. His stock value is dropping. His board is questioning him. His reputation is in ruins. His reputation should be in ruins. He committed fraud. He made some financial decisions you disagreed with. That's not fraud. He hid $63 million in offshore accounts. He transferred assets to his girlfriend's name. He lied to me, to investors, to the government. That's fraud by any definition. Constance sat down finally, her composure cracking slightly. What do you want? Money? Is that what this is about? I can write you a check. $5 million. $10 million. Just end this lawsuit and disappear. I don't want your money. I want what's legally mine. Half of the marital assets, recognition of my contributions, and the truth on public record. The truth according to you. Your version of events. The truth according to bank records, emails, testimony, and forensic accounting. Facts, Constance. Not versions. You never understood Richard. Never appreciated what he was building. He needed support, not someone questioning his every decision. I gave him support for 8 years. I helped him build his company. I made connections, provided strategy, invested my family's money. He took all of that and claimed it as his own achievement. Then he cheated on me and tried to steal what I helped create. That's the truth you don't want to accept. Constance stood abruptly. You're going to regret this. When Richard's company collapses, when his employees lose their jobs, when innovation is stifled because you destroyed the man leading it, you'll regret what you've done. Richard's company won't collapse. It'll be fine. Maybe better without him running it. His board already removed him as CEO, remember? The company's doing fine without him. Because they're scared of you. Scared of your lawyers. As soon as this is over, they'll bring him back. They removed him because he committed fraud and his judgment is questionable. That's not my fault. That's his. Constance walked to the door, then turned back. He loved you once. Really loved you. Before you became this vengeful person. He loved what I could do for him. My connections, my family's money, my willingness to stay quiet while he took credit for my work. When I stopped being useful and started demanding recognition, his love disappeared fast. That tells me everything about what it was worth. After Constance left, Naomi sat alone in the living room for a long time. The confrontation had been inevitable, but it still left her drained. Constance would never accept that her son was anything less than perfect. Would never acknowledge his crimes or his betrayals. Would always blame Naomi for refusing to enable his behavior. That afternoon, Brittany tried to reach her. A text message from a number Naomi didn't recognize. This is Brittany. We need to talk. Richard's falling apart. You're destroying him. Please stop this. Naomi stared at the message for a long time. The audacity of Brittany reaching out, asking her to stop fighting for what she deserved. The audacity of claiming Richard was the victim here. She typed back, he destroyed himself. I'm just making sure everyone sees it. I didn't know about the offshore accounts. I didn't know he was hiding money. He told me everything was his, free and clear. You knew he was married. You knew sleeping with your boss was wrong. Whether you knew about the accounts doesn't change that. I'm losing my apartment, my car, everything. Your lawyers are taking it all. You accepted stolen property. That has consequences. Please. I'm 26. I made a mistake. Do I have to lose everything for one mistake? Naomi almost felt sympathy. Almost. Then she remembered Brittany at charity events, her hand possessively on Richard's arm. Brittany moving into Naomi's home while the divorce proceedings began. Brittany wearing jewelry Richard had given Naomi. You made choices. So did Richard. Now you both face consequences. That's how life works. She blocked the number. No more conversations with Brittany. No more appeals to sympathy or claims of victimhood. Brittany had been an adult making adult choices. Now she could handle adult consequences. The night before the preliminary hearing, Richard made one final attempt. He appeared at her parents' house at 10 p.m. looking haggard. Charles answered the door and didn't let him in. I need to see Naomi. Please. She doesn't want to see you. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Naomi appeared again, curious despite herself. What do you want, Richard? To talk. Just talk. Away from lawyers and parents and everyone else. Just you and me like it used to be. Against her better judgment, Naomi stepped outside, closing the door behind her. They stood on the front porch, the night air cold around them. You've won, Richard said quietly. The prenup's worthless. The evidence is overwhelming. My attorneys say I'll lose if we go to trial. So you've won. This wasn't about winning. Then what was it about? Revenge. Justice. Recognition. Truth. Richard laughed bitterly. Truth. You want the truth? Fine. I cheated on you. I hid money. I took credit for work you did. All of it's true. Happy? Are you going to say that in court? Publicly? If I have to. If that's what it takes to settle this. Why now? Why the honesty now when you've spent months lying? Because I'm tired. Tired of fighting, tired of lawyers, tired of watching everything collapse. My company's stock is in the toilet. My board has no faith in me. My reputation is destroyed. You wanted me to lose everything? Congratulations. I've lost it. Naomi looked at him, really looked at him. The man she'd married had been confident, energetic, full of dreams. This man looked defeated, older than his years. Part of her felt satisfaction. He'd earned this. Another part felt something else. Not quite sadness but recognition of what had been lost. I never wanted you to lose everything, Naomi said. I wanted you to be honest. To treat me like a partner instead of an obstacle. To value what I contributed. If you'd done that from the beginning, none of this would have happened. I know. I see that now. Too late. Yeah, too late. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Richard said, 50%. Public acknowledgement of your contributions. A statement that the affair happened. That's what you want, right? I'll give you that. We settle tomorrow before the hearing. And the hidden assets? I'll admit they were wrong. Fraudulent. Whatever word makes this end. Why the change? Your attorneys must have told you settlement was smart days ago. Because I talked to the board this afternoon. They're going to force me out completely. Not just as CEO but from the board. If this hearing happens, if all the evidence becomes public record, they'll have grounds to fire me for cause. No severance, no stock options, nothing. I lose everything, Naomi. Not just half. Everything. So that was it. Not remorse, not realization, but fear of losing more than he had to. Richard was finally offering fair terms because the alternative was catastrophic. I'll think about it, Naomi said. Talk to Patricia tomorrow. If the terms are acceptable, we settle. If not, we proceed with the hearing. Fair enough. Richard walked back to his car, shoulders slumped. Naomi watched him go, feeling strange. 4 months she'd wanted this. Richard defeated, desperate, willing to give her what she deserved. Now that she had it, the victory felt hollow. Not wrong exactly. Just hollow. Her father came out to stand beside her. He looked beaten. He is beaten. The board's forcing him out. If we go to trial, he loses everything. Do you want to settle? I want justice. Whether that happens through settlement or trial doesn't matter to me. Settlement's faster. Less painful for everyone. Except it lets him avoid public accountability. The hearing would make everything public record. People would know what he did. People already know. The media's been covering this for weeks. Everyone who cares knows Richard cheated, hid assets, and treated you terribly. A settlement doesn't change that. Naomi nodded slowly. Her father was right. The public shaming had already happened. The hearing would just make it official, part of legal record. But Richard was already paying the price. Company in chaos, reputation destroyed, relationship with his board broken. Maybe that was enough. Maybe she didn't need a trial to prove what had already been proven. Maybe settlement with fair terms was the faster path to freedom. I'll talk to Patricia tomorrow, Naomi said. See what she thinks. Whatever you decide, your mother and I support you. I know. Thanks, Dad. They went inside together. Naomi went to her room and lay down, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be the preliminary hearing or a settlement conference. Either way, this chapter of her life was ending. 8 years of marriage, months of legal battle, all coming to a conclusion. She thought about the woman she'd been when she'd met Richard. Young, hopeful, believing in partnership and love. That woman was gone, transformed by betrayal and the choice to fight back. The woman she'd become was harder, more cautious, less willing to trust. But she was also stronger, more confident in her own worth, no longer willing to be invisible. That transformation had a cost. But it also had value. Naomi Washington would never again let someone erase her contributions, take credit for her work, or treat her as less than an equal partner. She'd learned what she was worth, and she'd demand that others see it too. The preliminary hearing or settlement conference would make that official. Would give legal weight to what she already knew. And then she could move forward, whatever that meant. Sleep came eventually. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. One way or another, justice would arrive. And Naomi would finally be free. The courthouse steps felt different this time. Last time Naomi had climbed them, months ago for a procedural hearing, she'd been nervous and uncertain. Today she felt calm. Ready. The work was done, the evidence assembled, the truth documented. Whatever happened in the next few hours would be the result of that preparation. Patricia met her at the entrance, wearing a sharp gray suit. Richard's attorneys want to settle. They're offering 50%, public acknowledgement of your contributions, and admission that the hidden accounts were improper. Improper or fraudulent? They won't say fraudulent in writing. Liability concerns. But they'll say the accounts were hidden without your knowledge and that was wrong. Naomi considered this. It was close to what she wanted. Not perfect but close. What do you think? I think we can get more if we go to hearing. Maybe 55%, maybe better language on the fraud. But settlement means it's over today. No more legal fees, no more stress. No more months of waiting for trial. You move on with your life. And Richard avoids public testimony about the affair and the assets. Yes. which frankly benefits him more than you. The public already knows he cheated and hid money. The hearing would just make it official record. So settling lets him off easier. In a sense. But settling also lets you move forward faster. There's value in that, Naomi. You've been fighting for months. Do you really want to fight for months more? Naomi thought about this. The hearing would be satisfying in some ways. Watching Richard squirm while Helen explained the offshore accounts. Watching him sit through Trevor's testimony about Naomi's contributions. Watching the judge's face as he read through evidence of systematic fraud. But Patricia was right. Settlement meant freedom faster. Meant closing this chapter and starting the next one without months of continued legal warfare. What are the exact terms? Naomi asked. Patricia pulled out her phone, reading from an email. 50% of all marital assets as determined by Helen's forensic analysis. That includes the hidden accounts, the shell companies, and the properties in Brittany's name. Public statement acknowledging your substantial contributions to Sterling Security Solutions' success. Public statement that offshore accounts were established without your knowledge or consent. All legal fees to be paid from marital assets before division. And your name restored to company documents as a founding contributor. That last part wasn't in the original offer. I added it this morning. They agreed. Naomi felt something settle inside her. These were fair terms. More than fair, actually. Complete recognition, equal division, Richard publicly admitting wrongdoing. Everything she'd fought for. What do you recommend? Patricia looked at her seriously. I recommend we take it. You've won, Naomi. This settlement gives you everything you were fighting for. Going to hearing risks the judge giving you less, or Richard finding some technicality we missed. Bird in hand versus two in the bush. I say take the bird. Okay, let's settle. Patricia smiled. Good choice. Let me go tell their attorneys. We'll draft the settlement agreement this morning, have it signed by end of business today. You'll be divorced and compensated by next week. Patricia walked away to confer with Richard's legal team. Naomi stood in the courthouse lobby watching people move around her. Lawyers with briefcases. Families here for various hearings. Security guards checking IDs. All of it ordinary, part of the daily machinery of justice. She saw Richard then standing with his attorneys near the courtroom entrance. He looked tired, wearing a black suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. Weight loss from stress, probably. He caught her eye, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the lobby. What did he see when he looked at her? The wife he'd betrayed? The woman who'd fought back? The partner he'd underestimated? Naomi didn't know and found she didn't particularly care. Richard's opinion of her had stopped matching the day she decided to fight for herself. Brittany wasn't there. Of course not. Her role in this had been embarrassing enough without sitting through court proceedings. Constance wasn't there either. Richard's mother had probably been advised by his attorneys to stay away, her presence more liability than support. Patricia returned looking satisfied. They've agreed to our terms. We're drafting the settlement agreement now. Should be ready in 2 hours. Judge Lawrence will review and approve it, then you're done. What about the hearing? Cancelled. We'll submit the settlement agreement instead. The judge will review our evidence to make sure the terms are fair, but he won't hold a public hearing. Your evidence will be part of the case file but not part of public testimony. So Richard avoids the public humiliation of testifying. Yes, but the media has enough already. And you get everything you wanted without additional months of warfare. That's a win. They went to a conference room in the courthouse to wait while the settlement was drafted. Trevor had come to potentially testify and he joined them there looking disappointed. No hearing? Trevor asked when Patricia explained. Settlement. Better outcome, faster resolution. I was ready to testify. Ready to tell everyone what Richard did, what Naomi contributed. Your willingness to testify helped get us here, Patricia said. Richard's attorneys knew we had you as a witness. That strengthened our negotiating position. You helped without having to take the stand. Trevor nodded, though he still looked slightly disappointed. Naomi understood. He'd wanted his moment to publicly denounce Richard, to expose what had been done to both of them. Settlement denied him that catharsis. Thank you anyway, Naomi said to Trevor. For being willing. For providing evidence. For being on my side when it mattered. I should have been on your side years ago, Trevor replied. Should have spoken up when Richard started erasing you from the company's story. I didn't and I regret that. So testifying would have been my chance to make it right. You've made it right. Trust me. Your testimony and documents were crucial to building the case that got us this settlement. Helen arrived an hour later looking cheerful. Heard we're settling. That's smart. The evidence was strong, but trials are unpredictable. Settlement's the safer bet. Will Richard actually pay what he owes? Naomi asked. Or will he find ways to hide more assets? Not with the terms Patricia negotiated. All accounts must be disclosed and verified by me. Any assets discovered after the settlement that Richard failed to disclose result in penalties and potential criminal charges. He'd be stupid to hide anything else. He was stupid enough to hide things in the first place. Yes, but now he knows you'll find out. You proved that already. He won't risk it again. They waited. The conference room had terrible coffee and uncomfortable chairs, but none of that mattered. Naomi felt suspended between two chapters of her life, the marriage that was ending and whatever came next. Soon, very soon, the first chapter would close officially. Patricia's phone buzzed. She read the message then smiled. Settlements drafted. Both sides are reviewing. Another 30 minutes, then we present to Judge Lawrence for approval. What happens after he approves? He signs the order. It becomes legally binding. You and Richard are divorced. Assets are divided according to the terms. Public statements are released. Everything in the settlement happens, officially and finally. And I never have to see Richard again. Not if you don't want to. Your legal obligation to him ends the moment the judge signs. Naomi felt relief wash over her. No more Richard. No more Constance. No more fighting or negotiating or trying to prove what she was worth. The settlement acknowledged everything. Her contributions, his fraud, the proper division of assets. Everything important was recognized. 30 minutes later, they walked to Judge Lawrence's chambers. Richard and his attorneys were already there, looking resigned. The judge sat behind his desk, reading through the settlement agreement with the careful attention he gave all documents. This seems comprehensive, Judge Lawrence said after several minutes. Asset division is equal, acknowledgement of contributions is clear, statement regarding hidden accounts is unambiguous. Are both parties satisfied with these terms? Richard's attorney answered. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Sterling agrees to all terms. Patricia answered for Naomi. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Sterling agrees to all terms. Very well. Judge Lawrence signed the document with a flourish. This settlement is approved and entered into the court record. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, you are now divorced. Assets will be divided as specified. Public statements will be released as agreed. This case is closed. That simply. 8 years of marriage, ended with a signature and a sentence. The judge handed copies of the signed settlement to both attorneys and that was it. They were dismissed. In the hallway outside chambers, Richard approached Naomi. His attorneys had left, giving them a moment of privacy. Patricia stood nearby, watching carefully but not interfering. So that's it, Richard said. We're done. We're done. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For the affair, the lying, the way I treated your contributions. All of it. I'm sorry. Naomi looked at him, searching for sincerity. She found some, mixed with exhaustion and defeat. Richard was sorry, but mostly he was sorry for getting caught and losing half his fortune. The apology was real but incomplete. I appreciate that, Naomi said. But sorry doesn't change what happened. Doesn't give me back the years I spent believing we were partners when you saw me as an obstacle. I never saw you as an obstacle. You treated me like one. Same result. Richard nodded slowly. You're right. I did. He paused, seeming to want to say more, then just said, Good luck, Naomi. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. I already found it. Justice. Recognition. My own strength. Everything you tried to take away from me. Richard walked away without responding. Naomi watched him go, feeling strange. Not sad exactly. Not angry anymore either. Just, done. Finished with that chapter. Ready for whatever came next. Patricia touched her arm. How do you feel? Free. Good. Let's get out of here. We have paperwork to sign, but we can do it from my office. You don't need to stay in this courthouse anymore. They left together, Patricia on her phone coordinating the next steps, Naomi walking in silence. Outside the sun was bright. The day felt ordinary, people going about their business, unaware that Naomi's life had just fundamentally changed. Her phone buzzed. Her mother texting, How did it go? Naomi typed back, Settled. It's over. I won. Coming home for dinner? Yes. Need to celebrate. She put her phone away and got into Patricia's car. As they drove away from the courthouse, Naomi looked back at the building one last time. That's where her marriage had officially ended. That's where justice had been served, officially and legally. That's where Naomi Washington had proven she was more than Richard Sterling's wife. She was a business partner. A contributor. A woman who'd helped build an empire and refused to let someone erase her from that story. The settlement acknowledged all of it. Made it official. Made it undeniable. The hearing she'd prepared for had been replaced by settlement, but the outcome was the same. Victory. Recognition. Justice. Everything she'd fought for, achieved without the drama of a public trial but with all the substance she demanded. Richard would release a public statement that afternoon, acknowledging the affair and the hidden accounts. Naomi would release her own statement, brief and dignified, thanking her attorneys and moving forward with her life. The media would cover it for a few days then move on to other scandals. Richard's reputation would remain damaged but not destroyed. His company would survive without him as CEO. Life would continue, change but not ended. And Naomi would be free. Free to build her own company, make her own investments, live her own life without someone taking credit for her work or dismissing her contributions. Free to be herself, fully and without compromise. That freedom was worth more than money. Worth more than revenge. Worth everything she'd fought for. As they drove through San Francisco, Naomi looked out at the city she'd called home for 8 years. Felt different now. Not Richard's city where she existed in his shadow. Her city where she'd built a life and fought to keep it. The preliminary hearing was over. The settlement was signed. The marriage was ended. And Naomi Washington was finally truly free. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Naomi stood in the office of her new venture capital firm. The space was smaller than Sterling Security Solutions headquarters, but it was hers. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bay. Clean lines, modern furniture, everything chosen by her without compromise or consideration of someone else's preferences. Washington Capital Partners. Her firm. Her vision. Her rules. The settlement had given her $150 million after all assets were divided and evaluated. More money than she'd ever imagined needing, more than enough to build something meaningful. She'd spent the first month after the divorce just breathing, recovering from the stress of legal battle. Then she'd started planning. Female entrepreneurs face a funding gap, she told her father when explaining her business plan. They get less than 3% of venture capital funding despite starting businesses at the same rate as men. I'm going to change that. Charles Washington had smiled, proud. Your mother and I will be your first investors. Washington Capital Partners launched with $50 million in capital. 30 from Naomi's settlement, 10 from her parents, 10 from a group of female investors she'd carefully cultivated. The firm's mission was simple. Invest in women-led startups, provide not just money but mentorship and connections, build the kind of support network Naomi had provided to Richard's company. The difference was this time she'd get credit for it. Her first investment had been in a company led by a young black woman with a revolutionary idea for sustainable packaging. The kind of founder venture capitalists usually passed over. Too young, too inexperienced, too risky. Naomi had seen potential where others saw risk. She'd written the check. That company was now worth 10 times its initial valuation. Naomi's instincts, honed by years of working behind the scenes at Sterling Security Solutions, were proving sound. She had 3 more investments in the pipeline, all women-led, all addressing real problems with innovative solutions. Trevor had joined as her technical advisor, providing the engineering expertise she lacked. His official title was VP of Technology Assessment, but really he was her partner in identifying promising technical innovations. Working with Naomi was his chance to rebuild the career Richard had tried to destroy. This is what it should have been, Trevor said during their weekly strategy meeting. Partners who respect each other. Credits that are honestly assigned. Success that's actually shared. That's the goal, Naomi agreed. Build companies the right way, treat founders fairly, create value for everyone involved. Helen Rodriguez consulted on financial diligence for potential investments. Patricia Monroe handled all legal work. Even Margaret Chen had joined the team, running HR and operations. All the people who'd helped Naomi during her divorce had become part of her new venture. They'd believed in her when she needed it. Now she was giving them opportunities to build something meaningful. Richard's life had taken a different path. He'd left Sterling Security Solutions entirely after the settlement, forced out by the board and shareholders. His attempt to start a new company had failed to attract investment. Investors remembered the fraud, the hidden accounts, the spectacular public divorce. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. The last Naomi had heard, Richard was doing consulting work, advising startups for fees that were substantial but nothing compared to his former wealth. He'd moved to Los Angeles, away from the San Francisco tech scene where everyone knew his story. Brittany had disappeared from public view completely. The properties she'd been living in were sold as part of the settlement. Whatever money she'd saved during her time as Richard's mistress was apparently insufficient to maintain her former lifestyle. Sometimes Naomi wondered what happened to her, then decided it didn't matter. Brittany had made her choices. She was living with them. Constance had tried to reach out once, 3 months after the divorce. A letter, handwritten, arriving at Naomi's parents' house. Naomi had thrown it away without reading it. There was nothing Constance could say that mattered anymore. That relationship was over, severed completely. Naomi's personal life had settled into something peaceful. She'd bought a house in the Marina district, modern and bright, filled with art she'd chosen and furniture she liked. She'd adopted a dog, a rescue named Zeus who greeted her enthusiastically every evening when she came home from work. She'd started dating again cautiously. Nothing serious yet, but she was open to it. The fear that had gripped her after the divorce, the certainty that she'd never trust anyone again, had gradually loosened. She was learning that Richard's betrayal said more about him than about relationships in general. Her parents were proud. Her father told anyone who would listen about Naomi's new firm, about the investments she was making, about the women entrepreneurs she was supporting. Her mother simply hugged her more often, relief evident that the ordeal was over and Naomi was thriving. The public statement Naomi had released after the settlement had been carefully crafted. Brief, dignified, focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. It acknowledged the divorce, thanked her legal team, and announced Washington Capital Partners. The media had covered it respectfully, noting her grace under pressure and her plans to build something new. Richard's statement had been more apologetic, admitting to the affair and the hidden accounts, expressing regret. The tech community had largely moved on, more interested in the next startup success story than in Richard Sterling's failures. Occasionally, Naomi ran into people from her old life. Former friends of Richard's, people she'd hosted at dinner parties, colleagues from Sterling Security Solutions' early days. The encounters were awkward, people not sure what to say to the ex-wife who'd beaten the billionaire in court. Naomi handled them with quiet confidence. She'd done nothing wrong. Had only fought for what was rightfully hers. If people were uncomfortable, that was their problem, not hers. One afternoon, working late in her office, Naomi received an unexpected email. From Richard. Subject line, no response needed. She almost deleted it unread. Then curiosity won. She opened it. Naomi, I know we're not supposed to contact each other directly, but I wanted to say something and I didn't want to do it through attorneys. You were right. About everything. About my arrogance, my selfishness, my failure to see you as a true partner. I spent 8 years taking credit for work we did together. I erased you from our company's story because it was easier than admitting I needed you. The divorce taught me a lot. Mostly about consequences. I lost Sterling Security Solutions, my reputation, and any credibility I had in the tech community. I deserved to lose all of it. What I didn't deserve was you as a wife. You deserved better than what I gave you. I see you started a new firm. I see you're doing well, making smart investments, helping other entrepreneurs. That doesn't surprise me. You were always the smarter business strategist. I was just too proud to admit it. This isn't an apology looking for forgiveness. I know that ship sailed months ago. This is just acknowledgement that you were right and I was wrong. About everything. I hope you build something great. I hope every woman entrepreneur you help succeeds beyond expectations. I hope you find happiness with someone who actually deserves you. Mostly, I hope you've forgiven yourself for trusting me. That wasn't your mistake. It was mine. Richard. Naomi read the email twice. It was more honest than anything Richard had said during their marriage or divorce. Too late to matter, but honest nonetheless. She didn't respond. He'd said no response was needed and he was right. There was nothing to say. Richard had finally understood what he'd lost, but understanding didn't change the past or repair the damage. She saved the email in a folder labeled Closure, and went back to reviewing pitch decks for potential investments. That was her life now. Supporting people, building companies, creating opportunities. Everything Richard had done, but with honesty and fairness and proper credit given. 3 months later, Washington Capital Partners made its biggest investment yet. $20 million in a female-led biotech company developing cancer treatments. The company's founder was a brilliant researcher who'd been passed over by traditional investors for being too ambitious. Naomi saw ambition as an asset. She wrote the check. The investment paid off spectacularly. Within 6 months, the biotech company had breakthrough results, attracting attention from major pharmaceutical companies. Washington Capital Partners' stake was worth 3 times the initial investment and climbing. Naomi was profiled in Forbes as one of the rising stars in venture capital. The article mentioned her divorce from Richard Sterling but focused primarily on her business success. Washington proves that women can excel in the male-dominated world of venture capital, the article concluded. Her firm's impressive returns speak for themselves. Reading the profile, Naomi felt something she hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the reflected pride of being married to someone successful, but direct pride in her own achievements. Washington Capital Partners was hers. The success was hers. The recognition was hers. She'd won more than a divorce settlement. She'd won her identity back. The woman who'd been erased from Sterling Security Solutions' story had written a new story where she was the undeniable protagonist. The 1-year anniversary of the divorce passed quietly. Naomi marked it with dinner with her parents, a celebration of survival and new beginnings. Charles raised his glass in a toast. To my daughter, who fought for herself and won, who built something new from the ashes of something old, who proved that justice, while slow, does eventually arrive. To justice, Naomi agreed, clinking glasses. And to revenge, her mother added with a slight smile. It wasn't revenge, Naomi protested. Wasn't it? Her mother's smile widened. You took half his fortune, destroyed his reputation, and built a more successful company than he ever could have alone. If that's not revenge, I don't know what is. Naomi considered this. Maybe there had been an element of revenge in her fight. But mostly it had been about justice, recognition, refusing to be erased. The revenge, if it existed, was just a side effect of demanding what she was owed. Maybe a little revenge, Naomi admitted. But mostly justice. They're not mutually exclusive, her father said wisely. Sometimes justice looks like revenge to the person facing consequences. They ate dinner, talking about business and family in the future. Naomi felt contentment settle over her. This was enough. This life she'd built, these relationships she'd maintained, this business she was growing. Everything she needed was here. Later that night, alone in her house with Zeus curled at her feet, Naomi thought about the journey from that first courtroom hearing to now. The months of investigation, the stress of legal battle, the satisfaction of victory, and finally the peace of moving forward. The letter that had made Judge Lawrence laugh had been simple. Documentation of Richard's crimes, presented clearly and thoroughly. But it had been more than that. It had been Naomi refusing to be silent, refusing to accept injustice, refusing to disappear. That refusal had changed everything. Had ended a marriage, yes, but had also begun a new life. A better life. A life where Naomi was valued, respected, and recognized for what she actually contributed. She'd never go back to being the woman who'd signed that prenup without reading it carefully. Who'd accepted Richard's dismissals without question. Who'd watched her contributions be erased without protest. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger. The divorce had been painful, but it had also been necessary. A fire that burned away everything false, leaving only truth. And from that truth, Naomi had built something real. Washington Capital Partners was real. Her relationships with Trevor, Helen, Patricia, and Margaret were real. Her independence was real. Her success was real. All of it was hers, earned through work and courage and refusal to accept less than she deserved. The preliminary hearing felt like a lifetime ago now. That moment when Judge Lawrence laughed, when Richard's confidence cracked, when everything changed. Naomi remembered standing there, calm despite the chaos, knowing she'd done everything possible to prepare. That preparation had paid off. The settlement had given her everything she'd fought for. And the years since had proven she could build something great without Richard, without needing credit shared with someone who didn't deserve it. She opened her laptop and reviewed the next week's schedule. Meetings with 3 potential investments, all women-led, all promising. A speaking engagement at a Women in Tech conference. A consultation with a founder who needed strategic advice. Her calendar was full, her days meaningful, her work impactful. This was the life she'd built from the ruins of her marriage. This was what refusing to be erased looked like. This was justice, recognition, and success, all earned through determination and documented truth. And it was just the beginning. Washington Capital Partners would grow. More investments would be made. More women entrepreneurs would be supported. More success stories would be written. Naomi Washington's story had a happy ending after all. Not the one she'd imagined when she'd married Richard Sterling 8 years ago. Not the fairy tale of perfect partnership and shared success. but something better. A story where she was the hero, the protagonist, the one who fought for herself and won. The judge had laughed, Richard had lost, and Naomi had built a new life from the settlement. A life that was entirely, completely, undeniably hers. And that, she thought as she closed her laptop and headed to bed, was the best revenge of all. Living well. Succeeding beyond expectations. Proving that she'd never needed Richard Sterling to be successful. She'd only needed herself. Justice had arrived. Recognition had been given. The happy ending had been written. And Naomi Washington was finally, truly free to live the life she deserved.